What if Son of the Storm Dragon Part 8? I, Ren Daisuke, thought my unconventional life would end after years of working in Special Forces and CIA. So imagine my surprise when I died and was reincarnated as a dragon of all things in this world filled with magic and monsters. This is the story of my adventures in the greatest journey of all time, under the new name Rimuru Tempest. Tensura AU Chapter 15. Inherited Will Goblin Village, Rimuru Pav. The next day came by sooner than I had expected. Perhaps because I had so much on my mind from the events that had occurred yesterday, and so many unanswered questions that I just could not bring myself to sleep properly last night. By the time I had returned with Shizu to the Goblin Village, none of the other members of the human party had woken up, despite the treatment they had gotten, most likely a result of the exhaustion even if their bodies had made full recovery. I left Shizu with them as well for treatment, having already used my healing magic to deal with the injuries she sustained from our battle when Ifrit had taken her over, making it a total of 5 human patients that were under our care. Night came and passed and they still showed no sign of waking, which vexed and worried me a bit, but I knew it was out of my hands for the time being. I just had to wait for them to recover their strength on their own. So that was how I ended up having a restless night with many thoughts in mind. There were many things I wanted to ask this group, especially Masayuki and Shizu, who were fellow otherworlders, or at least I assumed they were. I hadn't really confirmed that. For all I know, they could be the children of an otherworlder or some other weird gimmick. Trainee had more or less filled me in on what the 5 of them had been doing in the forest before the fight with Ifrit, but hearing it from the source would be a bit more reassuring. I needed an idea of what the surrounding human nations were thinking in regards to the situation in Jura. The fact that these 5 had come in looking to survey the land and any changes to the monster patterns means the human settlements were at least cautious about wild monsters potentially leaving the forest and attacking their kingdoms. It was a valid concern, and one I wouldn't refute. Even the sentient monsters of the forest may do the same thing, especially those that were outside the domain of the Dryads. They had no one controlling them since my mother's presence vanished, and according to Trainee, most of the monsters that lived outside the Dryad's domain were of stronger species than even the ogres, making them at the very least low A rank, like Ranga and Raya. If they went on to attack human settlements close to Jura's borders, then the humans may very well feel threatened and choose to retaliate. It was one of the reasons why Trainee had suggested getting my name out into the forest. That way, even the higher-ranked monsters would know the forest was not without a guardian and leader, that my mother had left a successor behind for them. Honestly, I felt she was trying to sell her own glorified image of me, but I didn't try to stop her, because I did hope that it would stop any sentient monsters from doing anything foolish. "Good morning, Lord Rimuru." I was suddenly greeted by a female goblin as I stepped out of my house within this village, quickly dropping onto one knee and bowing her head. It was a nice wooden building, almost like a cottage, with 4 rooms and a decent amount of space. Honestly, I was surprised the goblins had been able to build something of this caliber with the short amount of time the dwarves had been in the village. Still though, I couldn't complain. This building was easily comparable in comfort to the one from the ogre village. And I could tell it was well maintained, even when I wasn't here. "Morning. You're Gobwe, correct?" I asked. Having named more than 1,000 goblins, it was easy to lose track of who was who sometimes, but they were a particular few that stood out to me. Gobwe was one of them, her amber-orange eyes having stood out among the goblins even before her evolution into a hobgoblin. It was a unique trait I'd yet to see in any of the other goblins. "Yes, my lord, you granted me the name Gobwe," she responded enthusiastically, seeming genuinely happy that I remembered her name. "Yes, well, what can I do for you, Gobwe?" I asked her, wondering why she had been standing outside my door when I stepped out. Especially so early in the morning. Shouldn't she be training with the other goblins right now? "Ah yes, about that," the goblin said as she stood up straight, looking a bit embarrassed. "I've been assigned to be your escort for the day, my lord. If you have any questions or are in need of anything, please do not hesitate to ask," she added with a quick bow. I see. It seemed the few ogres that had been sent to this village had also had some level of impact on the goblins' level of hospitality. They certainly seemed to be more formally welcoming than they had been in the past, especially if they were now assigning me an escort. As much as I didn't want to admit it, the escort thing was probably a good idea. With how rapidly this village was growing and expanding under Kaijin and the other dwarves, It was hard to recognize it as the same place my mother could have once toppled with a mere sneeze. "I want to take a look around the village," I told the goblin escort. "I haven't really taken the time to check its progress and development whenever I visit. Usually it would just be a report from Rigard and Kaijin about the current affairs, how expansion was going and other minor village affairs. While I did do a bit of sightseeing and speak to the villagers, I hadn't really taken the time to see the village development progress for myself. So I was going to take this opportunity to do so while I waited for our guests to recover. Let's start with the training grounds. I want to see how everyone is coming along under the ogres." "Yes, sir," Gabwe responded enthusiastically. "Please follow me, I'll lead you towards the training grounds," she said, to which I responded with the nod of my head. She turned on the heel of her foot and began to walk, with me following close behind. Making our way through the village, I couldn't help but admire how much it had grown in the last month since I returned with the dwarves. The goblin population had grown by over double its previous amount, their numbers going above 3,500. Apparently, the goblin communities within Jura were rather tight-knit due to being the weakest race, so when they heard of a goblin village under the protection of a powerful individual, with said goblins having evolved, they started flocking towards the named village in hopes of also currying my favor and protection. As a result, the village's goblin population kept growing every time I visited from the ogre village. Still, I welcomed them and named them whenever I could, making sure they were aware of our rules. In return, they swore loyalty and worked hard alongside everyone else. I'd initially been worried about how we would sustain such a growing population, but thanks in part to the Tempest wolves, the goblin village wasn't restricted to food from the immediate area. Through shadow movement, the goblins and wolves were able to gather food and resources from various locations within the forest, instead of being limited to their immediate surroundings. Meaning there was no immediate shortage of food. Naturally, they had also expanded their farms to produce more than enough food for everyone. For housing, they opted to start out with tents for the new residents as the craft of construction was still something not many goblins had talent in. But the increase in population meant Merd had more hands to work with, so things were progressing well and more goblins were settling into proper homes. All in all, the village was growing well, and the goblins had never been happier, feeling more at peace than they ever had been before. It seemed they were starting to build a bit more self-esteem than when they initially evolved, which was good. It didn't take us long to arrive at the training grounds that were on the outskirts of the village. There, a clearing had been created for the large number of goblins and wolves that were honing their skills and abilities. Compared to the clearing the ogres practiced in, this one was obviously much larger to accommodate the larger force and variety of creatures using it. I leaned against a tree by the edge of the clearing as I watched them train. They seemed to have made some progress since training under the ogres, with a wide variety of weapons and fighting styles now being present with the goblins rather than just bows and swords. Everyone seems to be growing faster than I expected. Given their large numbers, I had expected the ogres sent by the chief to have a more difficult time being progressive in teaching them. "Yes, sir, we're all working hard because we want to be able to protect ourselves as well as be of use to you," Gabwe responded. To be honest, I'd kind of forgotten she was there as I got lost in thought. Each and every one of us is doing our best to learn from our respective teachers. Be it the ogres and their combat training, the dwarves and their craftsmanship and construction, or the dryads who've been teaching us about agriculture. Everyone has been doing their best to learn and produce results to repay the kindness you've shown us, Lord Rimuru. The goblina added with a bright smile. "I don't think I did much. I haven't even been around much. You guys are the ones putting in all the effort and making something of yourselves," I said, feeling she was giving me far too much credit for their own hard work. "You may not have been around much, my lord, but the times you've visited have left a profound impact on the village each time," Gabwe countered. I was actually a bit surprised by the sincerity in her voice as she said it. "You've been taking in all the goblin tribes that have been coming in under your protection, granting them names and the power to protect themselves. You went out of your way to find the dwarves in another nation to help with the construction of our village. You spoke to the dryads on our behalf to help with our agriculture and food production. You even spoke to the ogres to help us with our combat training, even though they are known as a prideful race." Gabwe listed. When she put it like that, it was actually kind of flattering. "Well, I suppose I did help out a bit," I said as I rubbed the back of my head nervously. "I'd say it was more than just a bit, Lord Rimuru." Everyone here is grateful for the effort you put into making our lives better than they have ever been. That's why we've all been working hard to produce results that we can show to you." When Gobwe put it like that, speaking so passionately, it became easier to understand how the goblins and wolves had grown this village to such an extent within a month. While I hadn't been as involved as a leader should be when it came to the village, they had still managed to come this far under the guidance of the teachers I had gathered for them. They were working hard to pay back the kindness I'd shown them. "I just hope you haven't been overworking yourselves," I said as I turned back towards the training field. "You don't need to worry about that, my lord. Sir Rigard, along with the other goblin lords, have been making sure we get the proper amount of rest." Gobwe reassured me with a smile. He warned us that overworking would only prove detrimental to our health and needlessly worry you. Of course it would. You're my subordinates, not my slaves. So naturally, your well-being is of concern to me, I said. I was almost surprised by the waves of joy I felt radiating from her through desire, a second later, making me turn towards the goblin. What I didn't expect to see was her being on the brink of tears. A wobbly smile plastered on her face, cheeks red probably from embarrassment, as she tried not to actually cry in front of me. "Oh boy, it seems we have a crier here." I couldn't help but nervously think, I wasn't the best when it came to dealing with emotional women. The only reason I wasn't panicking was because I could tell that these were tears of joy, not because I'd said something stupid. "Are you okay?" I asked her with an amused smile that seemed to snap Gobwe out of whatever fantasy her mind had pulled her in. Her face went red as steam started coming out of her ears. I could literally feel the joy she had been feeling seconds ago give way to humiliation as she turned away from me. "Please don't look at me," she said as she frantically began to wipe her face. I couldn't help but laugh at her embarrassment. My gaze then shifted towards the training goblins once more. If all of them really feel that strongly about me, then I have to do my part as well. They were putting their faith in me, and doing their best to prove themselves to me. It was only fair that I work hard as well, and become strong enough to not only protect them, but this entire forest. "Knock knock," I called out as I entered Kaijin's workshop, Gobwe following right behind me. I had decided to make this our next stop. A rather large building from the outside, but given how many people were working on the inside, it made sense. The inside was your typical medieval blacksmith's workshop, filled with various tools, materials, a large furnace, and even a few partially finished weapons visible. Though I assumed some were just prototypes. There were several tables with goblins and ogres working on tools or weapons. However, they all seemed to stop upon hearing my voice, along with the entrance bell ringing when I opened the door. Ellipsis ellipsis. There were a few seconds of awkward silence before they all quickly stood from their seats, well, those that were seated anyway, and bowed their heads respectfully towards me. "Lord Rimuru," they all shouted unanimously in greeting. At this point, I was getting used to this kind of behavior from everyone, and was learning to take it in stride. It was probably for the best too, since if I really did end up forming a nation, I'd pretty much be a king. It was a weird thought, but one that I was getting more and more used to. Besides, it's not like I'd have to conform to normal standards of what it means to be a ruler or king. "Hello everyone, don't mind me, please continue as you were," I said as I waved them off. That seemed to do the trick, as bit by bit they all returned to their previous tasks. "Ah, Rimuru." Kaijin suddenly came out from the crowd and approached me. "Only you could cause such a ruckus around here so early in the morning, ha ha ha," the dwarf smith said with a loud laugh. One of the reasons I enjoyed talking with Kaijin a lot was because he actually talked to me like we were casual friends, whilst still keeping it respectful enough that he didn't cross boundaries of employer and employee. It was certainly a breath of fresh air compared to the subservient way that all the monsters in Jura spoke to me. But as I said before, I was getting used to it. "Sorry for the trouble, just thought I'd pop in and say hi since I passed through town sooner than planned," I said with a grin. "Right, I heard you were in the village due to the incident that occurred yesterday with the fire spirits," Kaijin said with a nod. "Would the humans resting in the nearby tents have anything to do with what happened?" "Yeah," I responded with a nod and a sigh. "Two of them are heroes, and the other three are adventurers from Bloomend. Or at least that's what Trainee was able to gather. I haven't had the chance to properly speak with them. One of the heroes was the vessel for the spirit. Due to some outside intervention, the spirit possessed her and went on a rampage. The other four barely made it out alive." "Sounds problematic," Kaijin said with a chuckle before his expression became serious. Still, you gotta handle this carefully. 2 heroes in a monster village could spell trouble if they decide to become hostile. I hummed in agreement. I wasn't naive enough to believe they would trust us simply because we saved them. Masayuki had been desperate at the time he asked for my help. Who knows what would happen now? I know, I'll be careful and keep a close eye on them. How are you going to handle this, though? Even if they aren't hostile, are you going to let them leave? Word of you and this village would spread to the neighboring nations fast that way. Kaijin inquired, his concerns valid. To be honest, no matter how I looked at it, we would draw attention to ourselves. Killing them would draw attention to the fact that 2 heroes died within the forest of Jura, making the Western nations more wary of us. Letting them go would give them information, but if handled well, they could present us in a positive light. It all depends on them. If I feel they harbor ill will and letting them go would endanger us, then I'll kill them. It may warrant investigations from the surrounding nations, but it's better than them reporting us as a potential threat and facing a potential invasion. I told Kaijin, eyes cold and glowing with a neon emerald color, before swiftly relaxing so as to not concern the others with my killing intent. However, if they seem decent enough, I'll let them go. They may even portray us as a friendly monster village or something, though there's no guarantee we won't be investigated and attacked anyway. Regardless of the outcome, it's best we stay on guard for the foreseeable future. It's a tricky situation. And this village is still too young to be involved in any major conflict. Kaijin said as he stroked his beard. He was right, the goblins were just starting to build their confidence from being the weakest species. Even as hobgoblins and goblinas, they were only C-rank monsters. Their average strength was equivalent to that of a well-trained soldier, with trained goblins being slightly stronger. What they truly lacked was skill. They had made great improvements with the ogres, but I doubt war was something they were quite ready for. Then again, nobody is ever ready for war. Even with the Tempest Wolves, which were an A-rank threat collectively, we wouldn't be able to fight without significant losses. Losses that would result in a drop in morale. Maybe I could just wipe out any invading forces myself. According to Great Sage, my power made me a high special A-rank threat. And even then, I was just below S-rank. Which was pretty cool, by the way. The only problem with that is the world would be aware of my existence. Which would bring about its own set of problems. Yeah, you're right. If push comes to shove, I'll handle it myself. I said with a sigh, before switching topics, wanting something a little more light-hearted. All of that aside, the goblins and ogres seem to be doing well under you. I said as I looked at all the working personnel. Kaijin noticed my change in topic, but I was glad he didn't comment on it. Nothing more needed to be said on that topic. Yeah, to be honest, having the ogre blacksmiths come here was a godsend. They've been a great help in not only reducing workload, but also in teaching the goblins about crafts. Because of them, I was even able to take on a few more apprentices. Kaijin said with a grin, well, the ogre chief did say he wanted his own people involved in the production of magisteel weapons for his people. If you found even more use for them being here, then that's great. They've even been sharing some of their techniques with us and me with them. It's made a good learning experience for the goblins as well, Kaijin said as he nodded his head in pride. The goblins have been soaking up whatever we teach them as well. While they still have ways to go, you can tell the effort and hard work they are putting into learning. I cast a quick glance at Gobwe, who'd gone and started talking with one of the other goblins in the shop, remembering what she had said earlier about the effort everyone was putting in for my sake. Have you had them start working with magisteel? I asked Kaijin curiously. The goblins, no. They don't have the necessary experience for that. As for the ogres, they caught on pretty fast once I showed them the ropes. Though for now I'm only having them craft 40% magisteel weapons and below so they get used to it. Kaijin explained. Wait, what about the young master's sword? I thought that one was 100% magisteel like mine. I asked. Well, I'm the one who did most of the work with the blade, but I had the most experienced of the ogres help me out a bit. Kaijin explained as he pointed to one of the ogres. A large figure with ash-gray skin and black hair. Honestly, he had a slightly intimidating appearance, but seeing him interact with the goblins showed he wasn't as scary as first impression would imply. It's Karob. I see. Makes sense, I guess. Perhaps the ogres had understood mainly because the blade was being forged for the young master, and thus were willing to leave most of the work to a skilled blacksmith like Kaijin, who was used to working with magisteel. It seems bonds were being forged even without my intervention. Perhaps the ogres would be more willing to directly interact with the goblin village in the near future. Lord Rimuru. The front door suddenly slammed open and rushing in all sweaty and out of breath was none other than Rigger. He looked a little panicked and distressed. Before his eyes landed on me. "Rigger, what's wrong?" I asked. "The 3 humans accompanying the heroes just woke up," he said rapidly as he was still trying to gather his breath. "I see. I guess it was time to see just what kind of people we were dealing with." Walking towards the building where our now awake guests were being kept, a lot of things were running through my mind. For starters, I was glad that the 3 adventurers were the first ones to wake up rather than Shizu or Masayuki. I kind of knew what to expect from them since I'd followed them around a bit when they were inspecting the sealed cave. The 3 of them were the ones that unintentionally let me out, though I wouldn't be telling them that. From what I had gathered when following them that day, they were a bit of a rowdy bunch. They were close, but always seemed to argue over the smallest things. And they seemed to have a knack for getting in trouble. They were more than fortunate that I'd cleared the sealed cave on my way out, otherwise their chances of surviving would have been practically zero. All in all, they seemed like a decent bunch when looking at them from afar. I guess it was time to see their character up close. Lord Rimuru. Rigard was standing outside the door to the building looking slightly nervous. "I take it our guests are inside?" I asked the Goblin King, prompting him to nod. "Yes, they woke up not too long ago feeling hungry. And while I was hesitant to do so without your permission, I had some food prepared for them," Rigard said with a bow of his head. His emotions are all over the place. Does he think I'll be upset or something? I decided not to think about it too much and instead soothe his worries. "Good work. Offering proper hospitality to our guests is something to be proud of," I said as I gave the large goblin an encouraging tap on the shoulder. "All right, thank you, my lord," Rigard said as he stood up straight. He then quickly regained his composure before opening the door for me. I nodded my head and walked in, with the Rigard and Gobwe following close behind. I don't know what I was expecting when I opened the door, but it certainly wasn't this. And by this, I mean the first thing I see is the sight of these 3 adventurers stuffing their mouths with food and chewing louder than dogs. Like seriously, who taught these 3 how to eat? They seemed to freeze on the spot upon the door opening and seemed to robotically turn towards me. Unfortunately, freezing like that with their mouths stuffed full did little to improve my impression of them. If anything, my already low impression from their lack of awareness in the sealed cave just sunk a tad bit lower. "Hey, who's the kid?" one of them whispered after swallowing his food with an incredibly loud gulp, the guy with the lengthy hair, Kaval if I remembered correctly. From what I'd gathered when tailing them in the sealed cave, he was the so-called leader of this group. Though, that didn't seem to mean much when it came to these 3. The other 2 merely shrugged their shoulders as they also looked at me curiously, still chewing like gluttons. My left eyebrow may have twitched slightly at being called a kid. While I may look like an adolescent in his first year of high school, I had the mind of a man much older than that. Still, I couldn't exactly fault them for that though. They had no way of knowing, and were only speaking based on what they were seeing. "Please show him proper respect. This is the lord and master of our village. The great Rimuru," Rigard declared as he gestured towards me with his right hand. You could tell the 3 of them were surprised when they heard that. Their eyes widened, and the 2 who had been chewing stopped for a moment before swallowing loudly as well. "The master?" All 3 of them shouted at once as they looked at me in disbelief. I mean, I get that it's hard to believe, but they shouldn't be that surprised. In a world filled with magic and monsters of all shapes and sizes, having a 14-year-old looking boy leading a village of goblins shouldn't be the most surprising thing. Yes, Lord Rimuru was also the one who rescued you and your comrades when that fire spirit attacked the forest. Rigger added. He could have waited to drop that bomb, but whatever. Wait, you stopped Ifrit? But that's a high-level elemental spirit. The girl of the group, or Ren if I remember well, yelled in shock and surprise. Guess stopping someone of Ifrit's caliber was impressive by human standards, though it was understandable why they were impressed, given that it was a powerful spirit used by a hero. You must be crazy strong. The last party member, Guido, said, sweat nervously dropping from his head. It seemed he was the most cautious of me between the 3 of them. That was the most sensible reaction one could have after finding out that a powerful individual was standing before you. Is there a problem? I asked with an amused smirk, eyebrow raised for added effect. And no, it's nothing like that. Please forgive our rudeness, Kaval said frantically, panicking slightly. If anything, we're grateful for your help. If you hadn't interfered, there's a chance none of us would have made it out alive. Shizu and Masayuki included. Thank you for your aid and hospitality, Kaval said as he bowed his head in gratitude. The other two quickly followed suit. Yes, thank you for your aid and hospitality, Ren and Guido also said upon bowing their heads. Huh, maybe these three aren't as idiotic as I thought they were. They clearly understood their situation, and were more than grateful for my intervention. My impression of them may have gone up juiced a bit. It's fine. Please lift your heads. I'm glad I was able to arrive in time before the worst came to pass, I said as the three of them raised their heads and seemed to relax. However, I have a few questions that I need to ask you three. Such as why a group of 5 adventurers, including 2 heroes, were traveling through a forest of monsters. And secondly, your account of the events that occurred yesterday. A fire spirit of that caliber doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Of course, after all the trouble we caused you, the least we can do is provide an explanation and answer what we can, Kaval said with the nod of his head. At least they were being reasonable and understanding about it. And so the trio of adventurers explained everything to me in detail. From the fact that they had initially been sent as a group of 4 by the leader of Blumen's guild master, including Masayuki, but encountered Shizu before they left the city for the forest. As Trainee had said, they'd been sent here in order to investigate the forest and any potential changes that may have occurred as a result of my mother's disappearance. Shizu just tagged along as she had been going a similar direction for whatever reason. Though they had been attacked and chased around by a few monsters, it was nothing they hadn't been able to handle, though I get the feeling Shizu and Masayuki were the ones handling it. Still though, I found myself surprised by how open they were being, going as far as to tell me their whole plan right off the bat. Clearly, these guys needed to learn not to trust so easily. Still, it worked well for me, so I couldn't really complain. I see. And do you think that your guild master will react negatively to our village? I asked. I wasn't expecting an honest answer, really. Being viewed as a potential threat was reason enough for humans to act. To be honest, I'm not too sure, Kaval said as he glanced back at his teammates, who shrugged in response, before turning back to me. Normally, a goblin village wouldn't be worth investigating, given that they are weak, but not only is the village huge, all the goblins here are so many it can be considered a town, even a small city. The group leader responded with a nervous sweat drop. I couldn't deny his point. Our overall population was just over 3,500 and rising with each passing day. While hobgoblins weren't a major threat, any kingdom would grow wary if a large number of them started mobilizing like they were doing here. Naturally, the humans would wonder why, and eventually I would be discovered. Not that I intended to remain hidden. I see, that is a bit of a tricky situation. But I don't think we have much to worry about in the short term. Feel free to include our village in your report, I said. I'd keep the fact that I was the Storm Dragon's child under wraps for now. As far as these 3 were concerned, I was just some Majin that helped them out. Though do try to paint us positively, I add with a smirk. Oh, of course, Ren suddenly called out with a bright smile on her face. You guys saved our lives. The last thing we want is to cause you any trouble. She's right. We owe you and the people of this village for saving and taking care of us, Guido added, giving a quick brow of gratitude once more. Thanks to you, even Shizu was able to make it out of the incident relatively unharmed despite being the one that got possessed. Hopefully the 2 of them make a fast recovery. I have a few questions for them as well, I mutter with a small frown, before turning towards the group of 3. But for now, what can you 3 tell me about the incident that led to Shizu losing control of her spirit? The expressions on their faces as soon as I asked that told me they didn't have much to offer in that regard. For a few seconds, they looked at each other multiple times before turning back towards me. To be honest, we're not quite sure what happened ourselves. Ren spoke up, bringing my attention towards her. One second we were walking deeper in the forest, chatting like usual, and the next thing we knew there was this explosion of purple mist as we were walking. My attention was piqued when she said the last part. At first, we thought it was some kind of poisonous attack from a monster, and quickly jumped out of it. But out of the 5 of us, the purple mist followed Shizu, Ren explained as the 3 of them shuddered at the thought. Clearly whatever it was had been creepy. From the outside, it looked like Shizu absorbed that purple mist, but the way she groaned and cried in pain showed that it was forcing itself into her. Naturally, we tried to rush in and do whatever we could to help her. But we were too late, Kaval said, as their expressions turned somber and all three of them looked towards the ground. Before we could get close enough to touch her, flames erupted around her. The explosion pushed us several feet back and immediately lit the surrounding trees on fire. It was terrifying. Her hair turned into a mane of fire, her eyes turning red like some sort of demon. Her entire body was then engulfed in flames for a bit. When the flames died down, the fire spirit, Ifrit, stood in her place. Giddo recounted. After that, things become a bit of a blur. Ifrit summoned 3 salamanders and I remember us offering to handle those while Masayuki fought and subdued Ifrit. You said they were 3 salamanders? When I arrived on the scene there were only 2 left. As much as I didn't want to imply it, I doubt these 3 could have handled the salamanders in a 3-on-3 fight. Yeah, one of them got the drop on us and self-detonated. It's probably the one that left us out of commission because I don't remember anything after that. Kaval said as he turned to his other party members, who shook their heads sideways, meaning they had also been knocked out by that attack. I see. That matches the information I received. Unfortunately, your group chose a bad time to wander into the forest. I said with a sigh. What do you mean? Aren asked. Let's just say the humans aren't the only ones that have been investigating the forest of Jura since the storm dragon's disappearance. About 5 weeks ago, I encountered a Majin that claimed to be the subordinate of a demon lord snooping around near our village. I stated, 3 pairs of eyes widening at the sudden revelation. There's a chance that Majin could have been involved in the attack that caused Shizu to lose control. Wait, are you for real? Kaval shouted in slight panic as he brought his hands to his head. As much as I wanted to tell them I was 100% certain of this fact, I wanted to keep my connection to the Dryads a secret as well. The tree spirits were well known for being a rare sight, and so they wouldn't suspect I pretty much had eyes on most of the forest through them. From what you've told me, that purple mist was drawn towards Shizu, or perhaps the spirit within her. Either way, if the Majin I'm talking about is involved, then this was a targeted attack. The more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed that Gelmud would just randomly attack Shizu just to unleash the fire spirit. He must have known I would intervene, or at the very least taken it into account. Gelmud didn't strike me as dumb when I encountered him before. He certainly had human-level intelligence, that much was for sure. I remember telling him that I am the guardian of the forest. If he was willing to unleash a fire spirit within the forest even after my warning, then he had to have taken my presence into account. Perhaps he had been trying to flush me out? If so, had he been watching the fight? There were too many questions, but one thing was clear. Whoever Gelmud serves has to be aware of my presence within Jura. There's a chance that they may have been trying to learn more about me by unleashing Ifrit. Calm down, I thought to myself as I shook my head sideways. There was no point in overthinking this. What's happened happened. All I can do is move forward and act with more caution until the current threat is neutralized. I turned towards the trio of adventurers. You guys are more than welcome to rest here until you've fully recovered. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask Rigard. I said, gesturing towards the large goblin king who stood at my left. Right, please don't hesitate at all. While our village is still fairly new and doesn't have much to offer, we'll do our best to be hospitable. Rigard said as he stood straight, looking kind of stiff. Thank you very much, the trio said in unison as they bowed their heads. I couldn't help but smile as I nodded my head. I knew the trio would be in good hands with Rigard handling things. I have to go now. Rigard, I'll leave things here to you, I said as I turned around and started making my way out. Right, the talk with Kaval's party gave me much to think about, in regards to both the human nations and demon lord territories. The game of chess had already started. Movements were being made to gauge the situation here in Jura, from scouting to antagonizing. All of this was just proof of the wheels starting to turn. I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. There were too many unknown variables, and I still knew far too little about this world to even try and make a guess. That was my biggest flaw at this moment, a lack of knowledge. In a world where beings could live for centuries or millennia or even forever in the case of special individuals like the demon lords or true dragons, being unaware of even the most basic things puts you at a severe disadvantage. And considering the endless possibilities of skills and magic, that was more terrifying than I was willing to admit. I didn't just need more power, but the knowledge to use that power appropriately in any given situation. But what I didn't have was time. The surrounding nations weren't going to wait, as proved by Gelmud's actions and the fact that a human party with 2 heroes had come into the forest. It was a troublesome situation to say the least, with no clear solution either. Speaking of Gelmud, Trainee and the others had yet to report anything after I told them to find him. With their abilities, they should have no problem locating him as long as he was within their area of influence. Could he have gone to the other side of the river? The area outside the Dryad's influence? Or perhaps he left the forest altogether. I know I would lay low if I pulled a stunt like the one he did. And if his intention had been to kill me, it meant he failed. Giving him a greater reason to lay low. I was tempted to just summon Trainee and one of the other Dryads and just ask them, but decided against it for the time being. It had barely been 24 hours, the least I could do was give them more time than that. Master, I have returned. I was brought out of my thoughts when Ranga jumped out the shadow of a nearby tree and landed beside me. Oh, hey Ranga, I greeted the Tempest Wolf with a smile. Ranga had been leading the Tempest Wolves in their training this morning since Raya was still at the Ogre village after I asked her to escort the Ogre Princess yesterday. I hadn't bothered asking her to return, feeling better knowing that she would be there and be able to alert me in the event that something of note happened there. I did feel a bit bad though. I wasn't blind to the fact that Ranga and Raya were extremely close. They were probably mates by now if I had to guess, though I had yet to confirm that. The reason I felt bad was because due to the fact that Ranga was usually with me when I was at the Ogre village, the two of them didn't get to spend as much time together as I felt they should. Neither of them ever brought it up or complained, their loyalty to me wouldn't allow them to. Still though, it was something I'd have to fix soon. I trust that you had a productive training session with the pack? I asked as I leaned back against the tree I was seated under, Ranga coming up beside me and laying down as well, head on my laps. Yes, Master. The pack has definitely grown, and their mastery over their elemental affinities grows by the day. Ranga reported as I nodded my head, running my hand over the large wolf's head. Raya had reported to me about that breakthrough not too long ago. While it was still weak, the fact that the Tempest Wolves were starting to tap into their elemental affinities was a major breakthrough, and would only make them a force to be reckoned with as they grew stronger. I couldn't wait to see that day. That's good to hear. I'm expecting great things from all of you. I said, much to Ranga's pride and joy, evident by the way his tail started swishing rapidly. Fortunately, Ranga had started gaining greater control over his powers, and thus didn't stir up a whirlwind this time around. The two of us just stayed there for a while, relaxing under the shade of the tree as the gentle breeze blew past us. If only things could remain this peaceful, but I knew better than to make such a naive wish right now. Tough times were coming. It's what I had been preparing for this whole time. Question is, am I ready? Well, true readiness was a notoriously difficult thing to achieve. All I could do was continue to get stronger and not get complacent regardless of how strong I became. It wasn't until noon that I felt the presence of none other than Rigor fast approaching our location through magic sense. Within a minute he had made it where we were, riding atop his Tempest Wolf partner. Lord Rimuru, he called out upon spotting me. Seeing as this was the second time today he had come to find me, I could guess what this was about. Have one of the heroes woken? I asked as I stood up, unfortunately waking Ranga, who had taken a nap on my lap. Both of them have regained consciousness, my lord, though they are still weakened. Rigor explained. That was good to hear. Not the weakened part, just that they had regained consciousness. I expected both of them to still be out of it for some time, but it seemed they were a lot tougher than I gave them credit for. To be honest, I didn't really have any questions regarding their reasons for being here. Most of those had already been answered by the trio earlier. My interest in these two was simply in the fact that they may be otherworlders like me. I had some questions I wanted to ask them, such as how long they had been here, and the circumstances of their arrival. I remember my mother mentioning something about heroes being summoned. Is that how they came into this world? It sounded like something straight out of a manga, but this was my new reality. I soon arrived at the building where the two had been laid to rest. I opened the door and got inside. Shizu and Masayuki had been laid to rest on beds that were on opposing ends of the room, but given the room wasn't that big they were still close enough. It turns out I wasn't the first visitor. Aren, Guido and Caval were already in the room. Aren over at Shizu's side as she talked to the hero with teary eyes, probably happy to see her awake and somewhat okay after everything that had happened. Guido and Caval were with Masayuki, also expressing their relief and gratitude for what he had done for them. All the chatting seemed to come to a stop when I walked in, as 5 pairs of eyes seemed to turn towards me at once. I'm glad to see that both of you are awake and doing better after everything you've been through. I say with an open smile. My name is Rimuru Tempest, though you've yet to see it. I'm the leader of the monster village you're currently in. I introduced myself as I stepped forward. Shizu Aizawa. Shizu greeted with a gentle smile and the nod of her head. She still appeared too weak to move, still laying down on the bed, her complexion slightly paler than it should be. Which kind of worried me. Masayuki Hanju, though I'm sure you already knew that. Masayuki responded with his own weak smile, referring to the time he introduced himself during the encounter with Ifrit. Though he currently seemed to be better than Shizu, he was still far too weak to move, and thus was seated on the bed with his back against the wall at its head. Thank you for helping us yesterday. There's no way we would have made it out without your help, he said as he bowed his head in gratitude. Yes, Aren, Guido, and Kaval have already filled us in on some of the things that happened. Thank you for stopping Ifrit, and ridding me of my curse, Shizu said as she attempted to sit up, but she struggled. Hey, you shouldn't move too much, Shizu, Aren shouted in panic as she gently pushed the hero back down onto the bed. Unable to fight back, Shizu relented and lied back down, before turning back to me. Her eyes relayed the gratitude and peace she felt in that moment. Aren is right. Both of you should take the time to rest. We used full potions to heal you as best as we could, but you may still need to rest before you can regain your strength, I told them. Oddly enough, my words seemed to make the two of them feel guilt and a strange sense of resignation. Though these feelings were hidden behind smiles and nods I was starting to realize were fake, the only reason I had even picked up on it was because of desire. I immediately knew that there was something wrong, something they weren't saying, or perhaps something they didn't want said in front of the trio. It was the only logical conclusion that I could come to. Do you three mind if I talk with Shizu and Masayuki alone for a moment? I asked, addressing Kaval's party. The three looked at each other shrugging before turning to the heroes in question who merely nodded their heads. Sure, we'll come and check on you guys later, Kaval said. The last part addressed to the heroes. Guido nodded his head in agreement. Yeah, and try to get some rest. Don't move around too much, Aren shouted as she followed after the boys who had already opened the door and were walking out. Once the door was closed behind me I turned back towards the two bedridden otherworlders, with so many questions on my mind, and so many things I wanted to ask. But I was more concerned about what I had sensed earlier. It had been unsettling to feel those kinds of emotions from people. All right, they're gone, I said as I turned to them with a serious expression. Now why don't you tell me what's really going on? I didn't elaborate further, since I didn't even know what I was asking about, but the way both Shizu and Masayuki flinched and turned away from me letting me know that whatever it was, I wasn't going to like it. The heavy guilt and self-blame I felt coming from Shizu wasn't exactly encouraging either. Frankly speaking, the events of yesterday were more straining on my body than I had thought, Shizu said as she turned back towards me, her navy blue eyes meeting my emerald ones. To be honest, I can't be sure what the actual cause is. Be it Ifrit being extracted from me or the substance that was used to corrupt Ifrit damaging me. Either way, it seems as though I don't have much time left in this world, Shizu confessed with a sad smile. What? I couldn't keep the shock out of my voice, nor did I hide it on my face. That revelation felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been splashed on my back without warning. Are you saying that you're dying? Both of you? I asked, turning to Masayuki who nodded grimly in confirmation. I took a deep breath to calm myself, trying to wrap my head around it all. It didn't make sense. These two had been fine when I last checked on them. I even had, Great Sage, run an appraisal on them just to be sure, and she sure as hell hadn't picked up on any of this. Open double angle bracket, close double angle bracket. Is there anything I can do to help? I asked, ignoring the silence from Great Sage, and forcing myself to calm down. I had already used potions and my own healing magic on them, so I doubted there was much else I could do, but if there was, I had to at least try. I don't think there is. What's happening to me is a result of me rejecting Ifrit for so long and in turn refusing to become a Majin. My body is merely catching up to its true age, Shizu said as she shook her head. It was only when she said this that I noticed that some of her hair was starting to lose its color at the bottom. Her already pale skin seemed to start wrinkling slightly. As for me, it seems my fight with Ifrit resulted in me taking a lot of spiritual damage. So despite my body being healed, I doubt I'll make it. Masayuki said as he clutched his chest in pain. He had been doing a good job hiding it when Caval's party had been here, but it seemed to be getting worse now. Spiritual damage? Open double angle bracket answer. Spiritual damage occurs when one's soul is directly attacked by attacks capable of bypassing the physical body altogether. Sustaining enough damage will result in immediate or eventual death. Close double angle bracket. And Ifrit was able to do this? How? I asked. The very fact that they were attacks that bypassed the physical body was terrifying in itself. It meant it didn't matter how many other resistances I had if my enemy was targeting my soul. Never mind that. Is there really nothing we can do for him? Open double angle bracket potions and your greater heal are not capable of healing damage to the soul, nor do you currently have the means to do so. There is nothing that can be done. Close double angle bracket. I had a feeling that was the case, but hearing it from Great Sage really nailed it in. I'm sorry. To be honest, I didn't even know why I was apologizing. I wasn't to blame, and I'd literally done everything I could for them. It's just that their circumstances were beyond what I was capable of handling right now. Please don't apologize. If anything, I should be the one apologizing for all the trouble I caused. Shizu said, "It wasn't your fault, given the reports and what the other three told me. It's likely that you were targeted." I told them, my mind flashing towards Gelmud as a new wave of anger began to build inside me. Yes, they told us about that. A Majin from the Demon Lord's territory. Masayuki said with a frown. There hasn't been any sighting of him since Ifrit was unleashed. But I'm sure he'll be back. I said, my eyes glowing green with hidden anger and rage. The recent revelations had made my anger and hatred towards Gelmud that much stronger. Like you, he was investigating the forest, though given his activities, I have reason to suspect that he, or his master, have motives within the forest that we are not yet aware of. I told them, it was why I was hoping the Dryads would be able to find some solid leads. I see, Shizu said with a small frown. I could feel the guilt emanating from her. There was nothing I could really do about that though, other than try to take her mind of everything that had happened. This may sound strange coming from a monster such as myself, but when I heard they were two heroes within the forest, I was actually interested in meeting and speaking with the two of you. I told them, earning slightly surprised looks from them, before Shizu's turned slightly cautious, though what could she do even if I was a threat? Don't worry, it's probably not for any reason that you're thinking of. I was just interested in meeting others like me who weren't originally from this world. Ooh, wait, are you saying that what you're? Masayuki tried to ask with wide eyes as he pointed at me. For someone on death's door, the look on his face was rather comical in that moment. Yeah, I'm from the same world as the two of you. I said with a smile and a nod. To be honest, I heard that heroes were summoned from other worlds sometimes, but I wasn't sure that you two were otherworlders, not until I heard your names at least. Shizu Aizawa, Masayuki Hanju, those are without a doubt Japanese names. I say with a grin at their shocked expressions. But you're a monster, aren't you? How is that even possible? Masayuki asked, still pretty shocked, but Shizu seemed to gather her bearings. I could literally see the gears turning in her head. It was kinda cute. Well, I wasn't summoned like the two of you. To be honest, I'm not really sure what happened myself. I said with a shrug. I was a Special Forces soldier and later a CIA agent in my old life. I remember getting shot in a shootout, and I'm pretty sure I died. Next thing I knew, I was busting myself out of a dragon egg. I declared without a care as I transformed into my dragon form, landing at the foot of Shizu's bed. You were reincarnated. Shizu muttered as she looked at me, both surprised by my current form and by the way in which I had been brought into this world. Masayuki seemed pretty shocked by that revelation as well. Wait, you died and were reincarnated as a dragon? That's so awesome. Masayuki shouted as stars appeared in his eyes, acting like every bit the adolescent he was. Shizu and I gave him strange looks, but I was more understanding since being reborn as a dragon did sound pretty cool. He had the decency to be embarrassed, though. Well, not the dying part obviously, that had to suck, but you're a dragon now. How awesome is that? Shizu couldn't help but sigh, whilst I just laughed. I had a feeling Masayuki and I would have gotten along just great had things turned out differently. He seemed like a man of manga and anime culture. I'm still getting used to this new life. I only got reincarnated a few months ago, 4 or 5 months give or take. I said with a shrug. It was hard to tell sometimes given how long it had taken me to make my way out the sealed cave. I noticed Shizu narrowed her eyes at me when I said that. Isn't that around the same time the storm dragon's presence vanished from Jura? Shizu asked. It was thanks to years of training from my previous life that I didn't flinch or make any other movement that would have made me look guilty. She's sharp, I couldn't help but compliment. Of course she had managed to connect the dots. Given my current form, of course she had, it was obvious to anyone with a brain cell. No point in hiding now, besides these two were going to die within hours, so it's not like they could use that info to hurt me. Okay, harsh, but so very true. It is, the storm dragon Viridia is in fact my mother in this new life of mine. I confessed. I watched as Shizu's face went from shocked to worried to troubled. Masayuki as expected seemed wary but amazed by the revelation at the same time. Honestly, they were taking the news better than I thought they would. I'd been ready for them to start doubting my every word or something, perhaps even claim everything I'd told them was a lie. But instead, they seemed pretty level-headed right now. I'm not really sure why I was reborn into this body, but I was hatched from an egg within the depths of the sealed cave. I encountered my mother not too long after. I started explaining, catching the attention of the two heroes. As much as I wanted to tell them everything, I knew I had to withhold some information, in case they decided to tell Aren and her party, whom I also wanted to have some last words with Shizu and Masayuki before they passed. So you're a spawn of the storm dragon, like Charybdis, Shizu stated. I wasn't surprised that she brought this up. First the ogres, then King Gazel, and now her. I get the feeling this would be far from the last time people made that comparison. No, according to her, I was born of her flesh and blood, whatever that means for a spiritual life form. I said with a shrug. I'm not a spawn of Magicules, but her offspring, meaning someone fathered me but I still don't know who. Besides, unlike Charybdis, I have a brain and soul. I added, a bit of my annoyance slipping out. It was getting old having to explain this over and over again. I see, Shizu said, looking even more troubled than before. Are you aware of the kind of reputation the storm dragon has? She went on to ask. I couldn't help but scoff at that. Yeah, my first encounter with my mother had told me a lot about what kind of rep she may have among the human populace. She literally boasted about destroying a town for fun before a hero came and stopped her, which is how she wound up getting sealed in the first place. Naturally, people would grow wary of me as well if they learned of my heritage. Yeah, I met her before her presence vanished, shortly after my rebirth. She was the one who granted me my new name. I told her with a nod. It felt good to know that she was worried about me. Given her reputation, I've decided it's best to wait on revealing myself to the world. I'm sure my mother had more than her fair share of enemies, and the last thing I need is humans putting a prize on my head. The way both heroes' sweat dropped and turned away from me was not reassuring. He, you may not be that far from the truth. The storm dragon is feared across many nations in the western provinces. If they heard she had an offspring, they would either attempt to kill you before you became a threat or capture and weaponized you for their own gains. Surprisingly, it was Masayuki who spoke up this time. The frown on his face told me that despite being a young hero, he had already seen a fraction of the worst this world had to offer. That's the thing about being a hero, oftentimes it's not just monsters and demons that they deal with, but even the bad people in the world as well. They get to see the worst in people that most people will never see in their lives. Yeah, that won't be happening. Either of those two. I had no intention of dying for a very long time to come, nor did I intend to become anyone's pawn. I had my own life to live, and while I hadn't exactly figured out what I was going to do with it, I did know that the path I walked would be one of my choosing. Besides, they don't need to worry about me going on destructive rampages, if that's what they'd be concerned about. Just because I'm the son of the storm dragon in this new life doesn't mean I'm gonna turn out exactly like her or that I agreed with her past choices and behavior. I told them as I lifted my head high with pride. I would hope not, Shizu said with a giggle. My mother was sealed away 300 years ago by another hero as a result of her actions, so if I had any intention of following in her footsteps, I wouldn't have bothered to save the two of you. And do you think that as a fellow otherworlder who was once human, I would suddenly have a blatant disregard for all my former human values and morals? I asked in a jesting manner. I may have been a soldier in my old life, so killing humans isn't exactly new territory to me, but I'd never do so on a whim. Only if I had no other choice. I told them, my expression turning serious to convey my sincerity. I wouldn't shy away from killing if I had to. Monster, human, or otherwise. Though the hands I had now were clean of blood for now, doesn't mean my soul was that clean. I'd killed in my old life, and I'd eventually kill here as well. As long as they were a threat to the things I held dear, I would show no quarter, no mercy. That's more than fair, I suppose. Shizu said with a sigh. It wasn't what she wanted to hear, but seeing as I was a monster, she understood that I had to look out for me and my own followers. Do you guys mind if I ask how you were summoned into this world? I asked, curious about how others came into this world from mine. Shizu and Masayuki turned to each other for a moment before nodding their heads towards me. I reverted back to my humanoid form, grabbing a nearby chair and taking a seat as the two recounted how they had been summoned into this world. Shizu, shockingly enough, had been summoned into this world by a demon lord. Something I found strange from the get-go, and made me have so many questions, but I held my tongue as she told her tale. The demon lord, named Leon Cromwell, summoned her into this world and had Ifrit forcefully enter into Shizu's body. From then on, she spent a while in Leon's service. She made a friend once, but things didn't end well there due to Ifrit taking over and killing her. It wasn't until years later that she encountered a legendary hero that she was freed from the shackles that bound her. She spent some time under the tutelage of that hero, until one day she left her. The only thing Shizu had to remember her mentor by was the mask she carried around. After that, she went on to become a hero in name, doing good deeds all over the western provinces, be it fighting monsters, demons, or even defending people from other bad people. This earned her the moniker, Conqueror of Flames. I was surprised to hear that she had been doing this for a good 70 years, she still looked so young. Then again, it did explain why her body seemed to be aging fast right now, with her hair even starting to turn white. It wasn't until much later that she gave up that life, mainly because it was getting harder to control Ifrit due to her age. While she appeared like a young adult on the outside, unfortunately the same could not be said for the inside. Fighting Ifrit for control had started to take its toll on her body. And so she retired, and settled for teaching. The fact that this world also had schools piqued my interest. I was curious about the kind of stuff schools in magical fantasy worlds learned about. Was it anything like you would see in high school manga or anime? Anyways, Shizu mainly focused on teaching otherworlders like herself, mainly children and teenagers who had been summoned or transported into this world that she managed to find. According to her, 2 of her students were already adults and were doing big for themselves, while 5 of them were still young. I could only assume those were the kids I'd seen her hugging through the Dark Elf's crystal ball back at the Butterflies of the Night. They seemed to care for her a lot. They would probably be heartbroken to hear that she died. Sounds like you lived a fruitful life. Sure, it was full of hardships, but you made the most of it, I said with a respectful nod. She'd found her place in the world and found people she cherished. Yes, it was quite the adventure, and in my travels I saw and experienced many things. I wouldn't trade that for anything, Shizu said with a smile as she laid on the bed looking up at the rooftop with a small smile. I turned towards Masayuki with a smile. What about you, Masayuki? What's your story? The blonde hero smiled sheepishly. Well, I should probably warn you that my story isn't as dramatic as Shizu's, he said with a nervous laugh. That's fine. I just wanted to hear your story, I said, the blonde hero nodding and sighing in resignation before he started talking. Turns out not all otherworlders were summoned to this world, as was the case with Masayuki, who was suddenly transported from our old world to this one whilst hanging out with some friends in the city. He appeared in the middle of one of the human towns. At first, he struggled due to not understanding the local language, something I hadn't even considered myself, but was able to get by thanks to his unique skill awakening and allowing him to understand. Thanks to said skill and some amusing events, he unintentionally went on to become a hero. He had gathered 2 party members at this point through his skill, which he had left in Bloomond, and was slowly beginning to have his name spread as a hero despite having been in this world for a little over a year. It was really impressive that he had managed to do so much in such a short amount of time, and was already making a name for himself. But it also made me concerned about what would happen when news of Masayuki and Shizu's passing went around. One was a retired hero and the other was an upcoming hero. The news was bound to spread like a wildfire. That meant more eyes would now be on the forest. I'd count myself as extremely lucky if all they did was keep an eye on us. but I wouldn't put it past a few people to come investigate or even come for revenge. You certainly accomplished a lot in such a short amount of time. I can see why you were able to earn the title of hero. I praised with a thumbs up, prompting the blonde hero to blush slightly from embarrassment. I wish I could say it was all thanks to effort, but some of it was just circumstantial, Masayuki said with a sheepish laugh. It may have boiled down to luck due to your skill, but at the end of the day, that power is yours. You should own those accomplishments. I encouraged, Shizu slowly nodding her head in agreement with my words. He's right, you could have done so much good with your power. And with time, you would have gotten stronger and gained more experience. Shizu said weakly with a sad smile. It seemed she was starting to lose more and more of her strength. She didn't have much time left, but because of me, don't finish that sentence. Masayuki quickly interrupted her. With him, it was harder to tell since there were no visible signs on the outside, but I could almost sense his life force fading away in a way. What happened wasn't your fault. While it's true you were slowly losing control over Ifrit as you grew in age, and that something like this was bound to happen sooner or later, yesterday's events in particular had nothing to do with you losing control. You were attacked, and Ifrit was corrupted and empowered to a level beyond your control. I made the choice to fight, to protect Eren, Kaval, and Giddo, but also to try and save you. I don't regret that choice, even now, knowing I'm about to die. So please don't blame yourself. Brave words coming from one so young. I couldn't help but think. He truly did have the heart and mind of a hero. It was admirable in a way, and foolish in another. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to fault him. I may have done the same in his shoes as well. It was a shame that one with such potential was going to die so soon, but as long as he was content with what he had done, no one else had the right to judge his actions. All right? Shizu said with a sigh. I could still feel the guilt she was carrying, but she knew there was no point in arguing with Masayuki. The three of us settled into a moment of tense and awkward silence. The atmosphere is heavy with their looming deaths fast approaching. Shizu's body became wrinkly and her hair white, whilst Masayuki seemed as though he was getting tired and sleepy, a sleep from which he would never wake. Knowing they had an hour at most, I stood from my seat. You two don't have long. I'll go get Eren and the others so they can say their goodbyes, I said as I made my way toward the door. I turned back in time to see them nod with sad smiles on their faces. I returned it with a nod of my own before stepping outside. Closing the door behind me, I couldn't help but take in a deep breath of air and let out an exasperated sigh. This situation sucks. They both deserve better than this. I couldn't help but think, as I leaned my back and head against the door, eyes closed. One had been dealt a shitty hand being summoned by a demon lord and forced into servitude, and the other was a teen hero that was getting into the height of his power. Rimuru? I opened my eyes to see the people I was just about to look for, Eren having been the one to call my name. She seemed to be carrying a small bouquet of flowers, probably meant as a get well soon gift for Shizu and Masayuki. The three of you should head inside, they want to talk to you. I told them. I wasn't sure what Shizu and Masayuki would be willing to divulge, so I left that up to them. I moved away from the door and walked past them. Sure, I heard Eren say hesitantly. I heard the door open as they walked in and continued walking away. I would give them time to talk and everything before coming back for their final moments. I could definitely use the air myself. It wasn't until 30 minutes later that I returned, hoping I'd given them enough time to talk, for Eren and her party to process and perhaps even grieve if need be. I knocked on the door. A few seconds later Kaval opened it, and I could tell just from the look in his eyes that they had gotten the news of Shizu and Masayuki's terminal condition. He wordlessly stepped aside and allowed me entry, and I entered the room without saying anything myself. Scanning the room I could feel the heavy atmosphere. Eren was seated close to the aging Shizu, who now looked like a woman well over 50 years with most of her hair having faded color and become gray. The young girl was holding one of the hero's wrinkled hands with both of her own, Shizu's other hand holding onto the mask she had been given by her mentor, her eyes red from crying and visible tear stains on her cheeks. On the other bed in the room was Masayuki, with Giddo seated on a chair right next to him. The blonde hero's physical condition hadn't changed by much, save for the fact that he seemed very tired now. His life energy was almost non-existent at this point. Honestly, I was surprised he was still conscious. That just went to show how strong-willed he was, how strong both of them were really. Is there really nothing you can do for them? Kaval asked soberly as he stepped up beside me. No, there isn't, I responded as I shook my head sideways. Both our full potions and my healing magic only work on physical injuries. I told them, Ren's face becoming a bit more anguished while Giddo tightened his fist in anger and frustration. Rimuru. Shizu's weakened and now raspy voice called out to me. I walked towards her bed and placed a hand atop the one she was using to hold her mask to her chest. I'm here, I said softly, seeing her like this, surprisingly hurt. It felt as though I had been robbed of something important and special in my life. She was supposed to be one of my destined ones, one of my partners, and while I was aware none of what the Dark Elf had shown me that night in Dwargon was set in stone, but knowing that I was going to miss out on something with someone like Shizu. Could you do me a favor, a last request? She asked. Name it. Could you devour me, like you did with my curse? She asked, shocking not just me but Ren beside me and Kaval and Giddo as well. Shizu, what are you saying? Ren asked as tears gathered in the corner of her eyes once more, her grip on the hand she was holding increasing. Right now, I feel like it's finally my time to rest. I don't love this world, but I don't hate it either. Kind of like the man who summoned me here. Shizu turned to look towards me. Despite her aged and frail form, her navy blue eyes seemed as captivating as ever in that moment. That's why. I don't want to be absorbed by this world. Knowing what I do about you, I'm reassured of my decision. So would you please, let me rest in the one place I'll feel safe? Despite the absurdity of that request, I couldn't really deny her when she asked like that. Looking at Ren beside me, the young girl was crying once more. Turning back to Shizu, whose eyes were looking at me hopefully, I knew at that moment I wasn't really going to deny her last wish. If you are truly sure, then very well. The happy and relieved teary smile she gave me in that moment tore at my heartstrings. Is there anything else you may want? If you can you visit the kingdom of Ingracia and save my young Otherworlder students? All of them are experiencing issues due to the actions of the countries that summoned them, and I regret not being able to help them. Shizu says before a guilty look appears on her face. And, if you cross paths with my former student, Hanada Sakaguchi, tell her I'm sorry I couldn't help her more or be the person she could lean and depend on, but that I am proud of the amazing woman she has become. I'll do my best, assuming she doesn't try to kill me for being a monster now. I promised with a sad smile. Thank you, she muttered as she laid back on the bed facing upwards, eyes closed with a content smile on her face as her breathing slowed down little by little, until eventually it stopped. With one last exhale her chest stopped moving, and Shizu Aizawa, the conqueror of flames, died. I closed my eyes in a silent respectful prayer before stepping away from Shizu's corpse, giving Ren the space she needed to fully cry her heart out, Kaval coming up next to her and placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Though I didn't miss the anguish in his own eyes. I turned towards Masayuki, who looked like a patient on heavy drugs just struggling to stay awake at this point. Guess that means it's my turn now? He said jokingly in an attempt to lighten the mood, if only slightly. I scoffed, but other than that, my expression remained somber. There was nothing amusing about this situation. Do you have any last requests? I asked. Depending on what it was, I would do my best to fulfill it as long as it was within reason. Other than asking for the same thing as Shizu, only one other thing comes to mind. Masayuki said. I felt the need to ask why he also wanted to be devoured, but decided against questioning a teenage boy on death's door. I never really told anyone this, but since coming to this world, I've been having an occasional recurring dream. Oh, what about? The situations differ, but the person I see within it is always the same. It's always this beautiful woman with blue hair and bright golden eyes. Masayuki says, a whimsical smile plastered on his tired face. I don't know why, but these dreams always felt so real, so lifelike. As if they were memories. You think this woman actually exists? I asked, but it was more rhetorical. The answer was already clear. I do, or at least I hope so. Those dreams were too real for me. I just figured that if I traveled enough as a hero, I would eventually meet her one day. Masayuki said with a regretful smile, for something like this to bother him was strange. But it was his regret, and his inner wish. Using thought reading, I was able to look into his mind and get a clear image of the woman he was talking about. She had azure blue hair kept in twin buns with black ribbons and deep gold eyes. Her attire consists of a dark-colored kipao dress with a golden dragon pattern, as well as white long gloves and white thigh-length boots, both adorned with gold ornaments. Even I had to admit that she was extremely attractive. I can't make any promises on whether I'll encounter her or not. But in the event that I do, is there a message I should pass on? I couldn't go out of my way to look for her or anything, given my responsibilities to the forest and its inhabitants, but something told me I would be seeing that woman one day. To be honest, I'm not sure. I've never even met her. But for some reason, I feel the right words to say are, I'm sorry, and I wish that things could have turned out better. My only wish is that you move forward, and live out your life happily. Or at least something along those lines. Masayuki said with a weak sheepish laugh. Those didn't sound like words you would say to someone you didn't know. Heck, those sounded like words you would say to an ex-lover or something of the sort. Just what was going on here? Either Masayuki was lying about not knowing her, or there was some sort of strange connection between the two of them that was causing these dreams Masayuki had been experiencing. Deciding not to think too much about it, I decided not to think about it too much and just honor my promise. You have my word, if I meet her, I'll make sure she hears your last words. I swore to him, earning a weak grin from the blonde hero. Thanks, Masayuki said, his eyes clearly starting to grow heavy. I'm feeling really tired now. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Then you should rest. I said with a sad smile, it would be a slumber from which he would never wake. The blonde barely nodded his head, his eyes closing as he finally gave in to the fatigue. Despite the fact that Masayuki's body was still breathing, his chest moving up and down a clear sign of that, I knew he wasn't alive anymore. His soul was broken from the spiritual damage and all that remained was a living corpse. Is he sleeping? Gido asked. Naturally he didn't understand. Perhaps Masayuki and Shizu hadn't properly explained it to them. No, he's gone. While it may appear like he's sleeping, his soul has been shattered beyond repair. All that remains here is an empty husk. I responded solemnly. I knew it would be hard for them to actually accept the reality of what had happened, especially for Ren, who seemed to be the youngest of the group. You guys may want to leave now. Are you going to? Ren tried to ask, though she found the words too hard to say. Still, I understood what she meant, and nodded my head solemnly in response. Yeah, it was their last wish. So I'll see it through, regardless of how sick in the stomach it makes me feel. I said through grit teeth. As someone who was once a soldier, I understood the value of having a body to bury, especially for friends and family. Which is why I found it hard to accept this request when Shizu suggested it. They had to have people who cared for them even in this world, and not having a body to bury would be like denying them the closure that came with losing Shizu and Masayuki, and I would be the one who would have denied them that. But I understood where Shizu was coming from when she made that request. She didn't want to die as part of this world that had caused her much suffering, she neither loved nor hated it, and as a result didn't want her body becoming a part of it. As an otherworlder, she felt she would be more at peace within me than as a part of this world. It was both an honor and a sad thing to hear. I wasn't sure of Masayuki's reason, but I'm sure he had his own. Either way, I would grant their wishes, even if it went against what I personally believed in. Then I'm staying. I turned towards Ren in slight shock, her eyes solid with resolve despite the pain that was buried underneath it. Are you sure? I asked, turning to Gido and Kaval to see their thoughts. The two moved to stand behind Ren, supportively placing a hand on each of her shoulders before turning to me with a resolved nod of their own. It's the least we can do, seeing them off all the way. Kaval spoke up. Ren was sobbing way too much at this point to form any coherent words, but she nodded in agreement with the squad leader. I nodded my head in respect and understanding of what they were trying to do, and wordlessly turned back towards the two deceased heroes that were lying on their respective beds. I wish I had gotten to know the two of you, especially you, Shizu. But I'm glad I got the chance to meet you at all. Perhaps it had been fate that allowed me to meet them in their last moments. Your wills are gonna live on through me, so may both of you find peace and rest for an eternity within me. Open double angle bracket notice. Would you like to use the unique skill, Apex Predator, on the individuals Masayuki and Shizu? Close double angle bracket. Open double angle bracket Y. End close double angle bracket. Yes. My hands stretched out towards the two heroes, a vortex of black magicules coming out and engulfing the two heroes before returning into me. And just like that the two heroes were truly gone, without a trace of them left behind but the cries of the trio of adventurers. That was the end of the tales of the Conqueror of Flames and the Lightspeed Hero. Open double angle bracket assimilation complete, analyzing ACQ close double angle bracket. Not now, great sage. Later. Hours later, the four of us stood on a hill that allowed one to see the entire goblin village and the vast forest beyond. Close to the very peak of that were two graves that I'd spent the rest of the day building, dedicated to Shizu Aizawa and Masayuki Hanju. I'd decided on this spot, hoping that the two of them would somehow watch over this place, even from within me. As the one who carried their wills, I could only hope that my actions would do them proud. Currently, Caval's party were kneeling before the graves, laying down flowers and giving their own thanks and prayers. After a few moments, they then turned towards me with sad yet content smiles on their faces. "Thank you for doing this for them, Rimuru," Caval said with a grateful bow, the other two doing the same. If they knew about me being an otherworlder, they wouldn't be surprised by me doing this much, though. Don't thank me, they were honorable individuals. I only wish I could have gotten to know them even more than I currently do. I responded with a genuine smile. The only thing you can do now is live on, and keep their memories in your hearts. As long as they are remembered, then they will live on. Yeah, I'll do my best for Shizu and Masayuki. I want to get stronger and make both of them proud. Ren declared as she wiped tears from her eyes and gave a strong and resolute expression. For most people, their strength and courage was only made apparent after a moment of despair and grief. I wasn't sure if the same held true for the trio of adventurers in front of me. They were clumsy, loud, and very danger-prone, but at heart they were good people. They made Shizu's last journey worth remembering despite all the hardships she had faced, and so I felt that the very least I could do was show support in some manner and form. "You're right, you need to do them both proud, and so do I said as I turned toward the graves, before turning back towards the trio with a teasing smile. To that end, maybe we should do something about that junk that you three call gear." "Hey!" the three of them shouted in offense as they glared at me. I couldn't help the laughter that came out at their expressions. The following morning came by sooner than I'd expected. I stood by the village gates along with Kaijin, Rigurd, Ranga, and a few other goblins, bidding our guests farewell. "Thank you for everything, Rimuru, what you did for us, as well as Shizu and Masayuki," Ren said with a beautiful smile on her face. It was certainly a breath of fresh air to see her like this rather than what she had been like the previous day. While that loss would no doubt leave its scars, I was confident that these three would be able to overcome that pain and come out stronger. "Yeah, not to mention this gear that you gave us," Caval said as he inspected the new armor Kaijin had made for him and the rest of his team as well. "Honestly, this may have been a bit much. I don't think I could afford something like this even if I saved up for a year," Gito said as he pulled on the direwolf fur that outlined his armor. After coming back from the graves for Shizu and Masayuki, I'd taken these three to Kaijin's workshop in the hopes that he could get something decent made for them. Nothing too extravagant or powerful, as that would draw unwanted attention on them and us, but something better than what they had. And so Kaijin, the other dwarves, and the ogres had put some armor and clothing together from various material, including steel thread imbued with resistances. They even made 2 swords and a staff each made with 20% magisteel that would not only increase the conductivity of their weapons, but allow said weapons to slowly grow alongside them. Just think of them as gifts. You all said you were going to do your best to make Shizu and Masayuki proud. This is just my contribution to that," I said with a nod. These three really were good people. I hoped I'd meet them again one day under better circumstances. "Well, thank you either way. We'll do our best to represent them well," Caval said with a nod. "Yeah, and you can count on us to tell the guildmaster about how you rescued and took care of us. I'm sure he'll understand about Shizu and Masayuki too, if we explain what happened," Ren said as she nodded her head in determination. "I'm counting on you, then," I responded with a smile, though this one was more forced. While I was hopeful, I knew I couldn't rely on their words alone. They may try to paint a good picture of us, but word of 2 heroes dying would undoubtedly spread, and the kingdom of Bloomend would no doubt want somebody to blame. Why would they protect a town of monsters at their own risk? It would be naive of me to assume we were safe. With that, the 3 adventurers set off, beginning their long trek back to their nation. I watched them go until they were out of sight before letting out a sigh. "Master?" Ranga called out, sounding slightly concerned. I noticed that Rigor and Kaijin were looking at me similarly. Rigor, Ranga. I want you both to intensify the training of the wolves and goblins. Kaijin, have a reservoir of fully sharpened weapons ready from this point on. I said as I turned to face them, my expression deadly serious. Two well-known heroes died within the borders of our forest. We need to remain cautious for the foreseeable future, lest we perish. Yes, sir. Chapter 16. Rising Lord. 3 days had passed since Kaval's party left the goblin village. I had Doris and Tria keep a passive eye on them just to make sure the three of them didn't bite off more than they could chew on the way back, and aside from being chased by a horde of red ants, the three of them were doing just fine on their journey. According to Doris, there were some notable improvements to their strength since leaving. I had a feeling the equipment crafted for them played a role in that. In those 3 days, most of my time was spent helping out with the goblins and wolves' intensified training regime, as well as double-checking the village's security and scouting system to ensure they were prepared for the worst and not caught off guard. Fortunately, there were no complaints from anyone, though I had a feeling that word of why the sudden change had already gone around. If anything, the goblins trained with more fervor than before, something I was happy to see. At the current moment, I stood before the entrance of what was once my mother's prison and home for the past 300 years, the sealed cave. Strangely enough, this was my first time coming back here since I left 5 months ago. With how close the cave was to the goblin village, it wouldn't have been a bother for me to take a quick flight here, and yet so much time had passed. With a sigh, I walked into the cave as I allowed my thoughts to wander. A lot had happened in the last 5 months, from meeting and befriending the ogres, meeting the dryads, subduing the wolves and the goblins submitting to me, traveling to Dwargon and building the goblin village to what it is now. Initially, I was concerned that I wouldn't fit in among the monsters due to my human-like mentality and the fact I assumed that monsters may not possess intellect close to that of humans. But when I met the ogres, those fears were immediately thrown out the window. Not only were they intelligent, but they had a culture and manner of doing things that almost seemed Japanese, if a lot more on the traditional side of things. It was truly a stroke of good luck that they were the first intelligent monsters I had encountered upon leaving this cave. After that came the dryads, then followed by the goblins and direwolves. And while the latter two initially didn't have much in terms of intellect, they'd made a lot of headway since evolving and learning from ogres and dwarves. All in all, I'd managed to fit in despite my initial concerns. I'd made friends and subordinates I could count on to stand behind me. At first, I had planned to protect the forest out of respect for my mother's wishes, but the more time I'm spending here, the more connections I'm making, the more I'm finding my own reasons to want to protect and develop this land. My mother had left me to act as guardian in her place, but now more than ever I was sure of what I needed to do. Ever since coming back from Dwargon, I'd been on the fence about actually building a nation of monsters, but now I was sure it was possibly the best way I could not only protect this land, but better the lives of all those in it. All right, great sage, lay it on me. I said out loud, since I'd devoured Ifrit, Shizu, and Masayuki. Great sage had been giving me periodic reminders about informing me of the skills I had acquired from them, but I'd been putting it on hold. Mainly because I was busy overseeing things in the village, but also because I wanted to give a brief grieving period in honor of the two heroes. I didn't want to seem like the bastard who was happy the two died just for some skills. Open double-angle bracket analysis on the skills acquired from the individuals Ifrit, Shizu, and Masayuki has been completed. Close double-angle bracket. Start with Ifrit. I had an idea of what to expect here given that I had fought Ifrit. Not to mention it was a fire spirit, so most if not all its skills would definitely be fire-related. Not that I minded, as it stood I already had water, wind, and lightning elemental magic. If I get spatial and earth magic, I'd pretty much have control over all the primary elements that made the world. Still, having them and learning to properly use them were two entirely different things. I'd have to set some time aside for that soon. I was acquiring skills faster than I was learning to use them, which wasn't good. I may have Great Sage to help me with things like control, but I couldn't rely too heavily on it like that lest I become complacent. Having help was fine, but relying on it too much would only make me weaker without it. Open double-angle bracket understood. Skills acquired from the individual Ifrit are Body Double, Flame Transformation, and Flame Manipulation. Body Double allows the user to create copies of themselves. The durability, range, and number of copies is dependent on the user's proficiency and the amount of magicules used. Flame transformation allows the user to transform magic or spiritual bodies into flames. Flame manipulation allows user to freely manipulate and shape flames created from magicules within the surrounding environment. Close double angle bracket. Just those three? I thought, but honestly I wasn't really surprised. I guess it makes sense though. Ifrit was a fire elemental, and all of the skills and abilities it showed in the fight were fire-related. Even its own body was made out of fire. But body double sounds really useful. Alright, move on to Shizu. I told Great Sage, curious as to what skills I'd gotten from my fellow Otherworlder. Open double angle bracket. Understood. Unique skill, Degenerate, successfully acquired from the individual Shizu Aizawa. This skill has a total of 2 sub-skills. Synthesis allows the user to merge multiple separate objects into one. This includes matter, magic, skills, and even living beings, allowing for the creation of stronger skills with combined effects. Separation allows the user to separate the properties of an individual object into multiple objects. Close double angle bracket. That was unexpected. Degenerate was a much more powerful skill than one would initially assume at first glance. The ability to merge and separate anything I desire was something people could only dream about. In the wrong hands, it could be used to create powerful weapons, skills, and magics that could prove detrimental to a lot of people. The fact that it had been put into the hands of someone as kind-hearted as Shizu was a blessing in disguise that not many people were even aware of. Open double angle bracket. Notice, using the unique skill, Degenerate, the skills, Flame Manipulation, and Flame Transformation, have been merged and influenced by Storm Magic to create the extra skill, Black Flame. Close double angle bracket. I couldn't help but sweat drop at that. Why do I get the feeling that you're going to be doing this often? I asked, slightly amused. It seemed Great Sage was pretty happy with the acquisition of this skill, and would most likely be putting it to a lot of use in the near future. Open double angle bracket. There is no evidence to confirm this theory. It's all in your head. Close double angle bracket. I couldn't help but snort at its response. Right, well, whatever. At the very least I know you'll have my best interest at heart and use Degenerate to optimize my skills. I said, amused by how Great Sage behaved almost humanly in that moment. Just let me know whenever you shuffle my skills. Wouldn't want to be left in the dark. Open double angle bracket. Understood. Close double angle bracket. Knowing that was the only form of confirmation I was going to get about Great Sage actually looking forward to experimenting with my skills, I decided to move on. Alright, now what did I get from Masayuki? I asked. Open double angle bracket. Devouring the individual Masayuki has resulted in the acquisition of the unique skill, Chosen One. This skill has a total of 4 sub-skills. Hero's Action guides the user and their allies down the path of becoming heroes, inevitably making them famous. Hero's Blessing grants the user and their allies an immense amount of luck, which manifests in various forms such as landing critical attacks, avoiding lethal attacks, or perhaps finding valuable items. This skill also results in the actions of the user being viewed in a positive light, no matter what they do. Hero's Charisma. This skill grants the user the ability to inspire and motivate allies, granting allies immense courage that enables them to fight, even in the most desperate situations. It also has the effect of turning defeated enemies into allies. Banner of the Supreme King allows the user to call upon their fallen allies and replicate their abilities, memories, and experience inside the user. Close double angle bracket. Wow, I couldn't help but be surprised by the effects and capabilities of this skill. Once more, this was another easily exploitable skill in the hands of the wrong person. The ability to bolster your allies, boost your luck, and even influence other people's opinion on you so they remain favorable. The fact that this skill had been in the hands of Masayuki, someone who seemed genuinely intent on becoming a hero, even if it was because his skill influenced those around him to that path, was a good thing. And now that same skill was in my hands, I had to be very careful about how I decided to use this skill. The ability to change the luck factor of myself and my subordinates was no joking matter. Use it too much and they may rely on it too much in battle, rather than using their own strength and skill to win fights. Still though, I couldn't overlook the benefits of having such a skill. The ability to motivate those that I viewed as allies regardless of how dire the situation was a powerful skill. Morale was the key to any fight and war. Open double angle bracket notice. The effects of Chosen One are automatically applied to those that carry the user's divine protection, utilizing the soul corridor between user and subordinate. Close double angle bracket. Good to know. It meant I wouldn't have to worry about acknowledging everyone as an ally just so the skill could take effect. Hey, Great Sage, is it possible to limit or cancel some of the sub-skills of this skill? Open double angle bracket affirmative. While the skill can be difficult to control, it is not a problem for me. Close double angle bracket. Did Great Sage just gloat? Perhaps it was also improving the more it watched me and my interactions with the outside world. Then turn off Hero's Action and limit the manipulative effects of Hero's Blessing, I told it. If I had been a human, then I wouldn't mind the effects of Hero's Action. But for a monster to walk down the path of becoming a hero just seemed counterproductive to me. And if it dragged other monsters into the same path, then that was just as bad. I couldn't imagine all the goblins under me suddenly walking down the path of becoming heroes, despite the skill's effects. That would just seem strange to those that weren't affected by Chosen One. As for Hero's Blessing, I didn't mind the increased luck factor, even though I didn't want to become too reliant on it. But what I really wanted to limit for the time being was the fact that it manipulated people's perspective on me. If all my actions were viewed in a positive light by those around me, then nobody would ever tell me when I was wrong or speak out against my decisions. And that was more of a crutch than it was a benefit. It was already bad enough that some of my subordinates would willingly kiss the very ground I walk on. I didn't need this skill adding on to that. So it was best to turn it off for now, and only use that aspect in situations where I felt it was truly necessary. Open double angle bracket understood. Shutting down the sub-skills, Hero's Action, and Hero's Blessing, until further notice. Close double angle bracket, glad to know I can count on you, partner. Open double angle bracket HMPH close double angle bracket. That time I was pretty sure I heard a sense of pride in the voice of Great Sage, though I chose to ignore it for the time being, lest my ever-trustworthy yet sassy skill tell me it was all in my head again. With most of my personal business done, I decided to make my way out the cave. Funny enough, there were still plenty of magistones and hippocute herbs growing if you looked in the right places. Perhaps they had regrown in the last 5 months. The place was still loaded with magicules after all. The sealed cave would make the perfect farm for these rare materials. It was a little degrading to transform the place that once housed my mother into a farm, but I doubt she would care much seeing as she had been alone here for a long time, and thus wouldn't have any fond memories of this place. If anything, she may prefer to stay as far away from the cave as possible. Either way, it was a good place to produce unique materials of the highest quality that could not be mass-produced anywhere else, if what I'd gathered from Kaijin and King Gazel held any merit. I just had to make sure no intruders entered the cave without permission, much like Kaval's party had done. I'd probably set a few goblins and wolves here, or maybe have them include the cave in their patrols. Within 20 minutes, I'd left the cave and flown over to the goblin village by sprouting dragon wings out of my back, landing softly within the growing village's center. Everyone seemed busy, but they all seemed to take a second to bow their heads respectfully towards me before continuing with their tasks. I told them to do this after they kept stopping whatever they'd been doing every time I visited and would go down and formally greet me. You'll never get anything done if you guys stop every time I make an appearance. I don't want to be the reason you don't make any progress in the village's development. So from now on, stick to short but respectful greetings that won't impede your duties. That's what I told them, knowing that asking them for anything more would be too much for them. I was glad they were at least taking that much to heart. A brief bow was a good enough show of respect rather than getting down on one's knees every time. Lord Rimuru, I heard the ever-soft and elegant voice of Trainee, someone whose presence was a little overdue by now. Turning to my left, I saw her approaching me with Rigard next to her. That most likely meant she arrived whilst I was at the sealed cave. She most likely knew that I was in the cave, and for whatever reason chose to wait here. Perhaps out of respect, leaving me to the privacy of visiting the place I first met my mother? I couldn't be too sure. Regardless, she was here now, and that was all that mattered to me. Trainee, I greeted with a nod. There was a lot more I could have said, but I was more eager about what she had to say. Forgive my delayed return, Lord Rimuru, The search for the Majin known as Gelmud was not as fruitful as I had hoped. Trainee said as she bowed her head with a regretful expression formed on her face. Unfortunately, it appeared that Gelmud had already managed to leave the forest as neither I nor my sisters could find any trace of him within the forest. Please forgive our failure. I see. Don't worry about it. Gelmud is clearly a slippery Majin that's used to running. I reassured Trainee as I thought back to the time when Gelmud had shot into the air as fast as a rocket during our first encounter. If he was capable of flying at such speeds, it's no wonder he was able to leave the Dryad's range of sight. I only wish the situation with Ifrit hadn't been so dire, or else I would have pursued him myself. However, not wanting to return empty-handed, we expanded our search for anything connected to Gelmud. Trainee revealed, I had expected as much after a day had passed without any news from them. If Gelmud had been within their domain he would have been easily located, so the alternative was that they were looking into his activities within the forest. We were able to find a potential lead connected to him. Namely a monster within the forest that he named, a lizard man that goes by the name Gabiru. He named a lizard man, huh? I thought out loud. Ironically, my first encounter with Gelmud was when he was offering Zijin and Apido names in exchange for their loyalty and saving their lives. That couldn't be a coincidence. Forgive my interruption, but I felt I should also mention that Gelmud was the Majin who named my eldest son prior to his passing. Rigurd informed. I remember him mentioning a named goblin among them that died at the hands of the direwolves. So it wasn't a coincidence. For whatever reason, Gelmud had been going around giving names to monsters, and he'd been active in the forest for longer than I thought. But if what I knew of the process was true, then he was constantly weakening himself in the process. I had no clue as to what he was planning, but if he was willing to weaken his own power, then it had to be something big. Where is this Gabiru? We need to pursue this lead immediately while it still has any worth, I asked Trainee. At this point, this lizard man was our only lead to whatever plans Gelmud had. I'd personally question him, and depending on how cooperative he was, I wouldn't need to take extreme measures. He, along with most of the lizardmen tribes, have made their home at Lake Sis. There is one more detail I feel I should add, Trainee explained as I turned to her, silently prompting her to continue. Gabiru is the eldest son of the current lizardmen chieftain. I feel Gelmud may have named Gabiru with his heritage in mind. It may be possible he plans to get the support of all the lizardmen for his plans. So naming Gabiru was a political move to get the lizardmen in his pocket. Perhaps Gelmud is a lot smarter than we gave him credit for. It made sense, and made the situation that much more urgent. Still, the best way to get to the bottom of this would be to question Gabiru himself. I'll be paying a visit to the lizardmen territory immediately to sort this out. I want to put an end to this mess. Without waiting for another word, wings sprouted from my back once more, and with a mighty flap I shot into the sky in the direction of Lake Sis. I'd had enough of Gelmud at this point, since I found out he had been the one responsible for attacking Shizu. The fact that he had been active in the forest for months now made me regret letting him go the first time I met him, because now I was stuck following nothing but breadcrumbs just to find out what his intentions were. Whatever plans he had, whether it was his plan or that of his master, it would not succeed as long as I had a say in it. In a short amount of time, I made it to the shallow waters of Lake Sis, the large rock structure that the lizardmen called home quickly coming into view. Narrowing my wings, I rapidly descended towards the ground. I crash-landed onto the ground in front of the lizardmen entrance, large amounts of water and dirt splashing all over the place. But I didn't really care for that. Instead I focused on the numerous reptilian creatures, which I assumed were the lizardmen, that stood in various strategic positions. They all held spears and were pointing them at me cautiously, and with good reason. I'd literally crashed into their front gate. Who goes there? Identify yourself. One of them asked. I could only assume that they were the guards stationed outside. I'm not in the mood to try the diplomatic route right now, I thought to myself. So instead of responding, I unleashed 70% of my aura. Waves of power washed out of me and the effect was instant. Whatever confidence these lizardmen had before was replaced with unbridled fear. Some dropped their weapons in shock and fear. Some tried to back away, stumbling and falling on their asses as they did so. Not wanting them to eventually pass out or something, I toned my aura down to 25%, still more than enough to be considered a threat. I won't repeat myself, so listen carefully. I've not come seeking trouble, but I want an audience with your leader. I have an important matter to discuss with him. I decided not to mention Gabiru for the moment. The chief may attempt to have his son retreat if I did. And that would mean I'd have to get violent just to get the answers, something I wanted to avoid doing if I could. The lizardmen were residents of Jura just like any other monster, and thus were under my protection as well. But it just so happened that one of them was working with the enemy, and that was something I couldn't let slide. It was treachery in every sense of the word. However, I couldn't act until I had a full understanding of the situation, hence the reason I wanted to question him. If the lizardmen decided to try and protect him, well then I'd do what I had to do. Wouldn't be the first time I'd dealt with a betrayal from someone from the same country as me. The lizardmen were quick to process my demand, turning to each other with questioning looks as they wondered what to do. One of them then nodded towards me before running into their den, presumably to inform the chief or something of my presence, not that he hadn't felt my initial burst of power. According to what Great Sage had told me, lizardmen were C-rank monsters, much like the hobgoblins, except they were reptilian. Interestingly enough was the fact that they were descendants of dragons, but the dragon factor within them had diminished over time, leaving them as they were now. I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if they regained that dragon factor. Lizardmen Throne Room. Lizardmen Chief Pav. The entire throne room was in panic from the powerful aura that we had all just felt outside. Many were talking about rallying our men and preparing for battle, but I had been quick to put a stop to that. The reason being we stood no chance against whatever monster it was that was unleashing such power. To provoke such a being would be the end of all of us. And yet, despite the powerful aura that had been recently unleashed, there were no sounds of conflict to be heard outside. So was it foolish of me to assume that perhaps the individual this powerful aura belonged to had come to talk? Perhaps. Worst-case scenario was that they had come to subdue us and make the lizardmen their subordinates. Chieftain, one of the guards that had been stationed outside, came running into the throne room. He was clearly frightened by what I could only assume was the source of the power we'd felt before. "Sir, there's a powerful Majin outside demanding to meet with you," the guard reported as he fell on one knee in front of me. I see. Many of the gathered elders immediately began to speak amongst themselves, some speaking louder than others. But they were all basically wondering the same thing. Why did this Majin want an audience with me? The possibilities were endless, and attempting to guess without even seeing or knowing the guest would get us nowhere. There was no other option but to let this danger into our home. Refusing him may just anger him and bring destruction upon us. "Very well, let them in," I said, much to the shock of my council and personal guards. "But father, it's too dangerous to let such a Majin into our home." My daughter spoke up from beside me. She was the head of my personal guard, having proven herself strong and reliable, with the maturity and reasoning needed to lead. The other council members were quick to voice their own agreements to my daughter's words. I understood the fear they felt. But still, you all felt that powerful aura just now. I spoke loudly to silence everyone. If this Majin truly wanted to do harm, he could have easily forced his way inside without making this request. And we'd not have been able to stop him had he tried. If we can end this without angering our guest, then I'd rather do so. I reasoned with them. Many in the room were still uncomfortable with the idea, and honestly speaking so was I, but this truly was the best possible solution at the current moment. Angering this individual would only be inviting ruin to our doorstep. With the wave of my hand, the guard left to invite our guest, and everyone in the room waited with bated breaths. "Father, are you sure this is wise?" my daughter asked once more as she leaned in close. "I don't know, we can only wait to see what it is this Majin wants." I told her, as much as I would have preferred she not be here for this, I knew removing my daughter would be seen as weakness by the other tribe leaders present. Not to mention, I doubt she would willingly leave my side without a fight. She was very loyal and loving like that. After a moment, the air in the room seemed to change as the sound of footsteps on the moist cavern ground could be heard coming from the entrance of the throne room. Soon after a child? At least in appearance, he walked into the room. Glowing emerald green eyes scanned over all those in the room as he approached its center before coming to a stop. There's no doubt that this Majin is the source of that terrifying power. Even if it is currently a fraction of what it was before. I'd best speak up before these elders say something foolish. I thought to myself as I stood up from my throne, spreading my hands wide apart in a peaceful gesture. "Greetings, strong one. I am the chief of the Lizardmen tribe. I have been told you wanted to speak to me. What is it I can help you with?" I asked, making sure to be respectful but not submissive. My name is Rimuru Tempest. The Majin, Rimuru, responded, immediately letting us all know that he was named. Though unlike my son, I sensed no arrogance when he did so, it was merely a self-introduction. I apologize for the unannounced welcome, but I've come to address a rather urgent matter that could not wait. So I hope you'll spare me some of your time. I could tell this much was not a request, and refusing may just cost me my head. Still, what could be so important? Very well then, what is the matter you wish to discuss? As of late, there's been a Majin named Gelmud from the Demon Lord's domain acting within the forest, and while I cannot be certain, his recent actions have proven that he may become a threat to the forest if allowed to act without supervision. Rimuru said as his eyes bore into mine. I see. Am I to assume that you're enlisting the aid of the lizardmen in catching this Majin then? I asked him, but was surprised when he shook his head sideways. No, as it stands, he's already left the forest. Though I have no doubt he will return soon enough to finish whatever he started. Rimuru responded. I did, however, find out that Gelmud had been going around the forest, naming various monsters from various tribes and races. One of said monsters was your very own son, Gabiru, I believe is the name he was granted. I couldn't help but feel my own heart rate quicken at that. Just what had my foolish son gotten himself involved in now? Yes, my son did in fact receive a name from a Majin. It has caused him to become a bit conceited and arrogant, but he is otherwise a good lad. I tried to explain. Chief, I'll need to speak to your son. He may have information pertaining to Gelmud's intentions. The Majin said as his eyes looked directly into mine. Once more I could tell that this was not a request. He'd tear through everyone here if it meant finding my son. Beside me, I saw my daughter tighten her hand on her spear, in preparation to act if need be. Unfortunately, our guest noticed this too as his eyes shifted over to her for a split second, before shifting back towards me without a second thought. He doesn't even consider any of us to be a threat to him. I couldn't help but note. It was humiliating to be in a position where we could do nothing due to someone holding such overwhelming power over us, and yet that was the world of monsters, the strong preyed on the weak. With a sigh, I nodded my head towards the Majin before turning towards one of the guards by the exit. Very well, find my son. Bring him here at once. I ordered the guard, who swiftly nodded his head and ran out the throne room. Chieftain, my daughter called out from my side, knowing better than to call me father at times like these. I raised my hand to silence her. I understood her concerns, I shared them as well, but if Gabiru truly had agreed to follow an enemy from outside of Jura, then it was best that the truth be revealed now, rather than having it come back to bite us later down the line. At least that is what I was telling myself anyway. Rimuru Pav. I had managed to calm down somewhat since coming into the throne room, meaning I wasn't being reckless and throwing my aura all over the place, but I still made sure to show a firm hand in front of these people. This was my first time meeting the lizardmen, and though I'd yet to tell them of my heritage, which I planned to do, it was still important for them to acknowledge me as not just a powerful Majin but a respectable individual as well. That meant being firm, but reasonable as well. I couldn't just throw my weight around, but they needed to know that I would do that if push came to shove. Thus far, the lizardmen chieftain had been very hospitable, despite the fear and caution that all the others held towards me. Which in itself was understandable. He was also definitely well-spoken, almost as much as the ogre chief, and definitely showed higher than average intelligence for a monster. Though looking at their home and the way they dressed, you could tell they weren't quite as developed as the ogres. It took a few minutes, but eventually the guard that had been sent eventually returned with another lizardman right behind him. This guy wore a cape, baggy pants, and a furry neck warmer. I could only assume that that was the chief's son judging by the way he walked in with his head held high, walking in like he owned the place. I could already tell that he had a less than savory character. Ah, there you are, I was beginning to think you had gone out, my son. The chief said, looking rather relieved to see his son. I guess I'd put a bit too much pressure on him in that regard. I am here, father, but please, must you continue to address me in such a boorish manner? Gabiru said arrogantly despite going down on one knee. It was hard to tell whether the guy was deliberately being disrespectful towards his old man. In case you may have forgotten, I did receive a name. I'd much appreciate it if you would use it. How I address my son should not matter. You would do well to remember that, the chief said as he glared down at his son. It was becoming more and more clear to me that the level of respect between these two was pretty low, and that mainly stemmed from Gabiru becoming full of himself ever since he got a name. Gabiru was indeed stronger than the rest of his kind. He certainly had the magicules to prove it, though that was probably as a result of his naming. And I'd assume as the chief's son and heir that he had to be a pretty capable warrior as well, though I wasn't too sure. It was easy for someone like him to get full of himself due to the sweet tongue of someone like Gelmude. But that just meant he would be an annoying character to deal with, both now and potentially in the future as well. I'd need to do something about that before I left. Fine, but why have you called me here, father? This better be important. I have more important things to do than listening to another one of your lectures or doing menial tasks. Gabiru said rather arrogantly with the click of his tongue, completely dismissing the previous topic. Yeah, this guy had no respect for his father whatsoever. I don't think even my own father would have allowed me to get away with that in my old life. Then again, he was a hardcore military dude, the kind of guy who asked his child to address him as sir, and all that. Still, this guy was on some kind of major power trip, and if someone didn't knock him down a peg, he would eventually cause the downfall of the lizardmen. Right, about that. I'm sure you felt that overwhelming presence from earlier? The chief asked him. Gabiru nodded his head, his face surprisingly becoming serious for someone like him. Guess even he knew when to take things seriously. It's hard not to have felt such an aura. I was in the midst of preparing the men for battle if needed. Gabiru explained, and I couldn't help but nod in approval at that. So the guy wasn't a total lost cause. An arrogant and self-centered bastard, but at least he showed that some of his father's teachings had gotten through to him. Still, at the end of the day, he was far from ready to lead. If he were to become chief as is, his arrogance and naivety would be the downfall of his people. Yes, well, the Majin responsible for such an aura requested to speak with me. And I allowed it, the chief said as he gestured towards me, prompting Gabiru to turn towards me as well. His eyes went wide upon seeing me. Wait, are you telling me that immense aura just now was released by this scrawny little runt? Gabiru asked as he pointed his index fingers towards me in disbelief. The silence that filled the air was palpable, though I could sense the clear fear radiating from all the lizardmen as they stared at Gabiru in shock before their eyes would shift to me, especially from the chief and the female guard next to him who was likely his daughter if her resemblance in reaction was any indication. As for me, well, scrawny little runt? I couldn't help but mentally scream, but on the outside, the only indicator of my anger was the frantic twitching of my eyebrow. The fact that I'd even managed to keep my aura in check was a testament to my self-control. Is what I would have liked to say. Within a split second, I'd vanished from my position, moving faster than the lizardmen could hope to keep track of, and reappearing in front of Gabiru with my right fist cocked back. Said fist was coated in a bright purple aura. Before any of the lizardmen could react, my fist buried itself within Gabiru's midsection, the lizardman completely folding over before the force of the strike sent him flying off and crashing into a nearby wall. Crashing into it with a loud and audible impact. Gabiru, the female lizardman that had been beside the chief, suddenly cried out in alarm as she ran toward Gabiru. If my earlier assumption was correct, then that meant she was his younger sister. Fortunately, I held back enough not to do any permanent damage, despite my anger. And so Gabiru hadn't been heavily injured, but I'm sure he would think twice before he said something foolish again. Do you know who we are? Gabiru, who by the way was sporting multiple injuries from my previous attack, asked as he slowly stood up, his sister supporting him by putting one of his arms around her shoulders. Brother, that's enough. His sister tried to hold him back from provoking me further. But it was kinda too late. I was interested in hearing what this half-dead dimwit had to say. We are the mighty lizardmen, descendants of the great dragons whose blood flows through our veins. Gabiru declared as he foolishly pushed his sister away and shakily stood on his own 2 feet. Your words would have more credibility if you didn't look like you were about to pass out. Unfortunately, I have questions I need to ask you, Gabiru, so I can't afford to knock you out just yet. I said whilst shaking my head sideways. I really wanted to take another swing at him, but he really will get knocked out if he takes another hit from me. He might even die, which was something I wanted to avoid at all costs. You also chose the wrong person to brag about being a dragon descendant. I told them as I shifted from my human form into my dragon form. Now, I know this may have been more intimidating if I had been some enormous fully grown dragon, but I wasn't. I was a small hatchling, slightly larger than the average pup. So, to compensate for my small size, I decided to flare my aura once again, allowing my power to flood the room. The chief, his daughter, the councilman, the guards, and even Gabiru were all overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of my aura. The pressure forced those that were standing down onto their knees, and everyone found it hard to even breathe. Allow me to properly introduce myself. I am the elemental dragon Rimuru Tempest, son and heir of the storm dragon, Reincarnated Tempest. I declared loud for all to hear, still not letting up on the aura. But I was still able to hear the gasps and see the bewildered expressions as my words sunk in. It was then that I let my aura fade, the pressure in the room coming to an immediate stop as everyone took in a deep breath of air that they'd been struggling to take in seconds ago. I watched everyone catch their breath once more as they slowly stood up, or sat up in the chief's case. They all either carried expressions of shock, caution, or fear as they looked at me. Which I guess were appropriate reactions given my current form, everything I'd just told them, and the intensity of the aura I had unleashed upon them. Are you? I turned towards the chief who was still trying to gather his bearings. Are you truly the son of the storm dragon? He asked. I assumed that was pretty much the question on all their minds. The way all the lizardmen turned towards me confirmed that line of thought. I opened my mouth to respond but was cut off when the familiar scent of fresh air and forest leaves filled the throne room, and not a second later, Trainee made an appearance in a bright green glow that momentarily blinded those not accustomed to it, aka the lizardmen. It took a moment before they regained their sight, and I was surprised to see their eyes go even wider than they were moments ago upon laying their eyes on Trainee. A dryad? The chief nearly shouted in shock as he stood up from his throne, many similar whispers going around the room as they wondered what Trainee was doing here. At this point, I'm not really surprised. The dryads are pretty much the stuff of legends here in Jura. I thought as I turned toward the ethereal dryad. Trainee's eyes looked over everyone in the room, her face as soft and serene as usual, yet it didn't really give away how she was feeling in that moment. She silently began to walk towards me, much to my confusion, before picking me up from the ground, much to my embarrassment. Once I was securely within her arms, she turned towards the lizardmen chieftain with a rather firm look in her eyes, causing the old guy to flinch. Lord Rimuru speaks the truth. He is the son and heir of Lady Varadia, and therefore the rightful lord and guardian of the great forest of Jura. Trainee announced suddenly, confirming my heritage to the surprise of all the lizardmen. She then turned her sharp gaze towards Gabiru, the young lizardman heir gulping nervously under her scrutinizing glare. We the dryads will not tolerate any further disrespect towards him, Trainee said, a surprisingly malevolent aura surrounding her body, much to my surprise. Remind me never to make Trainee mad. I mentally noted with a nervous sweat drop. It wasn't her style, she was the gentle and serene type of individual. Seeing her angry like this was so out of character for her, but at the same time. Is it strange that I find this side of her kinda hot? I couldn't help but wonder. I quickly shook my head of such thoughts. Now wasn't the time. Please forgive our rudeness. We meant no disrespect to Lord Rimuru, the lizardmen chief quickly said as he got down on one knee, much the shock of all the lizardmen present. To be honest, I was kind of surprised myself. I hadn't expected things to come to this, nor did I necessarily want it to. But Gabiru ended up being less ideal than planned, and it seemed Trainee had been watching long enough that she had taken offense on my behalf. We were merely shocked by the news that Lady Varadia had sired an heir. But if even the dryads are claiming it to be true, then it must be so. My existence only became known after my egg hatched not too long ago, moments before my mother vanished. I decided to respond, but I wanted to get back to why I was here. But that's a story for another time. I came here to ask your son some questions, I said as Trainee turned towards Gabiru, allowing me to be directly facing him. Why yes sir, please feel free to ask me anything, Gabiru shouted as he went down on one knee. I could tell that he was frightened, probably worried that I would off him or something for his earlier disrespect. Good. I want you to tell me about the Majin who gave you your name, I inquired. Oh, you mean Lord Gelm. Gabiru was cut off when I suddenly unleashed a quick burst of my aura, but it vanished just as quickly, lasting for a second. Please don't address that Majin as Lord. He is not the Lord of anything, I emphasized as I glared at Gabiru. The lizard man swiftly nodded his head multiple times in understanding. Good. That weakling is merely the subordinate of another, not a lord in himself. I said firmly with a glare towards Gabiru. Well, yes, Lord Rimuru, I understand. Gabiru shouted apologetically. Good. Now, I know that Gelmud has been active within the forest. One of those activities include granting names to various monsters throughout the forest. What I want to know is why has he been doing this? What are his plans? I asked as I continued to glare at Gabiru. He already named other monsters? Gabiru seemed surprised, and even a little bit hurt by that statement, surprisingly. But he didn't mention that to me. That wasn't part of the plan, he told me. What plan? I asked Gabiru firmly as I glared harder at him. I could deal with him believing he was some kind of chosen one another time. Right now, I was more concerned with the fact that there was a plan. And I needed to know what that was. Gelmud was merely looking for promising monsters to work under him to help him control the great forest of Jura. He claimed that with Lady Viridia gone, the forest would inevitably collapse into anarchy and war, and that those who would serve him would not only gain names and power, but would aid in managing and ruling the forest. Gabiru confessed, I could already see the numerous flaws with this plan. Even though the forest was already under the management of the Dryads? I asked in skepticism. The Dryads were amongst the strongest species within the forest, not to mention they had the respect of many species within the forest. Trainee also looked offended at the notion of being usurped in the authority that she and her sisters had been granted. He claimed that the Dryads would inevitably be overwhelmed by the stronger monster races of the forest and would become too busy keeping out human threats, and couldn't be trusted to maintain order forever. Gabiru nervously answers, anxious at Trainee's darkening demeanor. I couldn't blame her for feeling offended though. Gabiru had literally chosen to put his trust in a Majin from outside the forest, rather than the Dryads that had been protecting it for centuries. Even I would take offense to something like that. And so you chose to put your trust in Gelmud, the servant of a demon lord, simply because he promised names and power within the forest. I said as I shook my head in disappointment. As a future leader, I'd think you'd have more pride than to bow your head at the servant of another lord. And you have the gall to call yourself a dragon descendant. I scoffed, as Gabiru lowered his head in shame. I may have been laying it on a bit thick, but I felt it was necessary if I was going to get my point through his thick skull. And so I continued. Tell me, Gabiru, did it occur to you that Gelmud was only using you since you were next in line to lead the lizardmen? I asked him, making his eyes widen. Also, did it occur to you that Gelmud didn't seek out monsters to maintain order within the great forest of Jura, but rather to build loyal forces to help him take control of the great forest of Jura by force against those who would oppose him, like the Dryads for example? Gabiru looked shocked at the implications of what Gelmud was really after, and many of the other lizardmen like his father and sister were also realizing why I took the matter so seriously. Trainee seemed even angrier, likely having realized this was an attempted coup towards the authority that she and her sisters had been granted by my mother. From what I have heard, the demon lords have a non-aggression pact with each other to prevent conflict, but that doesn't mean they aren't seeking more power to boost their standing against each other or accomplish any goals they may have. I told him and the other lizardmen. They also had one with the great forest of Jura preventing them or their forces from acting here out of concern for my mother's destructive rampages. However, that pact likely doesn't prohibit monsters who already live in the forest to swear allegiance to a demon lord or act on their behalf within the forest. Gelmud, who is a servant of a demon lord, is likely serving as both an intermediary and a potential scapegoat for his master, trying to gain powerful subordinates within the forest to control it from within, but can also ultimately take the blame in his master's stead if he gets caught by the other demon lords. By this point, the full implications of Gelmud's plot had sunk in to both Gabiru and the other lizardmen as it was now made clear. It was admittedly ingenious, though it was more likely engineered by Gelmud's master rather than himself given his personality. Still though, this is all merely speculation. Regardless of what his true intentions are, I have no intention of sitting idly by as anyone, human or demon lord, tries to take over my mother's domain. I said, this was merely what, great sage, had been able to deduce with the facts we had, before once more glaring at Gabiru. That job would be made a lot easier knowing I wouldn't have to worry about potential traitors working with the enemy. My lord. Surprisingly, it was the lizardman chieftain that spoke up. While I agree that my son's judgment was poor, wouldn't calling him a traitor be too much of a stretch? He called out both in concern and offense. He was probably worried I'd do something to Gabiru. Which was tempting, but I'd already socked and scolded the guy. There wasn't a need for me to do anything more. That being said, you think so? Perhaps you are right. After all, Gelmud deceived him as well. I responded with a few nods. The chief let out a relieved breath, but I wasn't done talking just yet. But that still doesn't change the fact that your son was so quick to doubt the management of the Dryads despite successfully managing the forest for many centuries, including even after my mother was sealed away 300 years ago, and had instead willingly submitted to a Majin from beyond these lands. Not only that, but the servant of a demon lord. Whatever else may have happened, he was fully aware when he made such a choice. And it's for that reason I can't bring myself to trust him. Gabiru seemed to gulp at that, his eyes going to the ground as he refused to meet mine, while Trainee looked at him in disappointment. I was surprised that he hadn't tried to speak up in self-defense of his own actions. It seemed the gravity of the situation had really hit home for him. He'd nearly brought all of the lizardmen under the rule of a demon lord, just because he had been quickly accepting of the false promises made to him. Hopefully this served as a good lesson for him as a leader and may actually help him grow. But for the time being, he was still a wild card I wouldn't bet money on. Chief, I'd like to make a proposal. One that I hope will be mutually beneficial to not just me but you as well, and depending on how you choose to see it, the lizardmen as a whole. I said, pausing for dramatic effect as it seemed I had the eyes of everyone in the room. I'd like to grant you a name, if you will accept it, that is. I offered, much to the shock of all the lizardmen. What? The chief managed to croak out, surprisingly losing his composure at my offer. It was actually kind of amusing to see. I'm not doing this out of the kindness of my heart, mind you, I said, bringing the chief down to earth. As it stands, since receiving his name, Gabiru has gotten significantly stronger. From what I can tell, he is the strongest amongst you all. I feel there's much about his character that needs correcting, as while he may be strong, he's not truly ready to lead. Such a task is best left to a parent, but as it stands, you lack the strength to rein him in. I said, it was a cold-hearted truth and a bitter pill to swallow, that much I could tell from the way the chief frowned as he closed his eyes in thought. What was left unsaid was the fact that accepting a name from me was basically the same as accepting becoming one of my subordinates. But I'm pretty sure that the chief, as well as everyone present, understood that. I didn't plan to rule or change anything amongst the lizardmen for the foreseeable future. Naming the chief was just a security measure to avoid Gabiru doing something stupid. Very well, Lord Rimuru. As chieftain of the lizardmen, I humbly accept your offer of receiving a name from you. The chief says after some careful consideration, much to the surprise of all of his fellow lizardmen, including both of his children. Very well then, I said as I pondered a name to give him, but thanks to thought acceleration, I was able to come up with a name rather quickly. As of this day, you shall bear the name Abaru. It admittedly wasn't the most original of names given the similarities it bore to his son's given name, but I figured it would serve as a reminder of why he received the name in the first place and the importance of disciplining his son. After bestowing said name upon the lizardmen chief, a large surge of magicules had been transferred from myself to the newly named Abaru. According to Great Sage, my magicule reserves were still around 87% and should recover in no time. Still though, that was a surprising amount of magicules considering that lizardmen were C-rank monsters. Everyone watched in surprise as Abaru was enveloped in magicules as his appearance began to change, a sign of him undergoing immediate evolution. When they eventually dispersed, everyone was shocked to see the chieftain now resemble a well-built, human-like male in his early to mid-30s, with small horns protruding from his long hair and large draconic wings emerging from his back similar to my own dragon wings. Great Sage. Judging by his new human-like appearance, I'm guessing it's safe to say that Abaru has evolved? I asked. It was pretty obvious. But unlike the goblins and wolves, who'd retained their green skin or canine-like appearance, Abaru seemed to have gone through a more drastic transformation. So I felt the need to be reassured that this was supposed to happen. Open double angle bracket answer. That is correct. The individual named Abaru had successfully evolved into a dragoon, an A-rank monster. Close double angle bracket. A-rank? I thought the lizardmen were C-rank monsters. How did Abaru jump 2 ranks as well? I asked. I wasn't really complaining or anything, but it was a bit concerning. The goblins and wolves had all jumped 2 ranks upon evolving, Ranga and Raya going up 3 ranks. It was becoming something of a trend, and that would be concerning if I decided to name a powerful monster, like say an A rank. Open double angle bracket affirmative. The individual Abaru received a large amount of magicules, allowing him to swiftly go through the B-rank lizardmen evolution, known as a dragon newt, and become a dragoon. The user's dragon factor also played a role in strengthening the dormant dragon blood within Abaru, making him stronger than the average dragoon. Close double angle bracket. Wow, then I guess there was some truth to Gabiru's words in regards to lizardmen being dragon descendants. Still, I didn't expect my dragon factor to actually impact Abaru's evolution. I can only hope he doesn't grow arrogant with this newfound power. I thought, impressed with how compatible my own power had been with Abaru's. I couldn't help but wonder if the same would apply to all of the lizardmen should I decide to name them. Father, you've evolved. Your power, your aura, it's incredible. The chief's daughter says in amazement at the changes her father underwent, a sentiment shared by all the lizardmen that are present, with even Gabiru being no exception, as they looked at the chief in awe and wonder. I had to agree with her a bit. Taking a moment to gauge his strength, I'd say he was definitely mid-A rank, his aura and magicules definitely greater than that of Ranga, Raya, Apido, and Zijin. Which was saying a lot, considering those 4 were the strongest subordinates I currently had. And if I had to guess, he was probably more experienced than the 4 of them as well when it came to combat. Indeed. And it seemed being dragon descendants, as Gabiru boasted earlier, played a crucial role. My dragon factor was used to strengthen your own, making you even stronger. I say, drawing attention from everyone present, including from Abaru and even trainee. And unlike with Gelmud, it seemed being named by me has allowed you to grow to the point of evolution. To be honest, I wondered why Gabiru hadn't evolved after being named. I suspect he may have been cheated of the process. But Abaru seemed to not only have evolved properly, and gained my divine protection, but it seems he's gone beyond even my expectations, evolving into a dragoon, an A-rank monster, rather than evolving into a B-rank dragon newt as predicted. This revelation left all the lizardmen shocked and amazed. Apparently, they hadn't even known that there was an evolution level beyond that of a dragon newt. Meaning that Abaru was the first to reach such a level as far back as they could remember. This also meant that Abaru had essentially become one of the strongest monsters in the great forest of Jura, aside from the dryads who were still of a higher level. I am truly honored and grateful for this opportunity that you have gifted me, Lord Rimuru. You have my eternal thanks. You have my word that I will use this power wisely and lead my people well in service of you as the rightful lord and guardian of the great forest of Jura. Abaru proclaims while bowing in gratitude, a gesture that was repeated by all of his fellow lizardmen, his children included. I will keep an eye out for this Majin, Gelmud, and will inform you immediately if I or my lizardmen encounter him, along with warning all of my lizardmen followers to be wary of him and to not accept any offers of power or names he may falsely promise. Should you ever be in need of our strength, please do not hesitate to call on us. It was good to know that I had the support of the lizardmen now, and trainee definitely seemed satisfied with their submission. Still, I had no use of them for the time being, so I'd let them continue with their lives as they did before. With them now aware and on the lookout for Gelmud, I had no reason to be too concerned. I may even come back and name a few more lizardmen for good measure. I am glad to hear that, though make sure not to grow complacent with your newfound strength, and take time to train, refine, and master your newfound power and with the aim to get even stronger. I advised Abaru out of caution. He nodded his head in agreement and understanding of my words. Of course, I didn't need to remind someone of his experience of the importance of continuously refining one's skill. I then gestured towards Gabiru, who flinched in response. I'll trust that you can discipline your son and educate him to ensure he doesn't repeat this kind of mistake, and hopefully straighten his behavior? Of course, Lord Rimuru. I will see to it that something like this does not happen again, and that he will improve his behavior henceforth. Abaru reassures me before giving his ashamed son a stern glare. A part of me did feel bad for putting Gabiru in what was obviously a tight and embarrassing spot, but I felt like he needed this. Just like the young master of the ogres had learned through humility, I hoped Gabiru would learn a thing or two as well. His father was just the insurance to make sure those lessons actually stuck. I suppose that concludes the reason for my visit. I spoke up. I'd pretty much gotten all the info I came for, and was leaving with a lot more than I bargained for. This visit had been more productive than I thought. Then again, maybe I should have expected it to turn out like this. Especially when Trainee made an appearance, she had the habit of wanting to make everyone acknowledge me as the Lord and Guardian of the forest. It wasn't a bad thing, but it felt like she was pressing the issue a bit. Actually, Lord Rimuru, there may be one more matter to be addressed. Trainee spoke up, prompting to turn and look up at her, since I was still being held in her arms. I probably could have reverted back into my human form a long time ago. I'm pretty sure the lizardmen wouldn't doubt my words at this point. But I'd remained in my hatchling form for Trainee's sake. She seemed to enjoy holding me in her arms, much like many of the women in my life, and thus I wasn't going to deprive her of that. Oh, and what's that? I asked curiously, wondering where she was going with this. Well, I was wondering if you would have the lizardmen join the trade network that you formed between the goblins and ogres? Trainee asked out loud with an all-too-innocent smile. That sly tree spirit, she'd deliberately spoken loud enough for everyone to hear so that the interest of the lizardmen would be piqued. Though to be honest, I hadn't even thought about including the lizardmen in the trade agreement. It probably would have occurred to me later on, but I would have left this place without ever having thought of the idea. Trade network? May I ask what this is about, Lord Rimuru? Abaru asked as he stepped forward. The other lizardmen council members seemed interested as well. Might as well, I thought with a sigh. I'd be having a word with Trainee about putting me in these kinds of situations out of the blue. And so I began to explain to the Abaru and his council about how I was currently taking residence in the ogre village in the southwest region of the forest, as well as how I'd become the ruler of a goblin village that was home to goblins and wolves, all of whom had been named by me. They all seemed shocked to learn that I had named over 3,000 monsters, even if they were goblins. It took a while to get them up to speed, but once they were, they seemed interested in trading with us as well. Perhaps it was so they could get more involved in my dealings and be closer to me, or maybe they didn't want to miss out on what could be a great opportunity. To be honest, this was a great opportunity for the goblins as well. Lake Sis was the largest source of water in the entire forest, so much so that it was surprising the lizardmen had managed to defend this territory from other more powerful species. Perhaps the dryads had something to do with it? I'd have to ask Trainee about that another time. Still, having the goblins trade with them would open many doors for growth and development. With that, we started discussing what we could possibly want from the other and what we had to offer. I couldn't speak on behalf of the ogre chief, but I would pass along Abaru's interest to trade with them as well. For now, this would be simply between the goblins and lizardmen. So Abaru and I spent a while talking. I requested access to their fresh water as well as fish for trade, and in return we would give them honey and a wider variety of meat compared to the fish they ate most of the time. Abaru requested that their weapons, namely spears, be produced by the goblins from now on. This was after I told him about the quality blacksmiths we had thanks to both the dwarves and ogres in the goblin village. In exchange, he was willing to send some of his own men to train the goblins not only how to fight with the spear, but also how to fight and move about in various environments such as swamps and the like. I felt like it was a good deal for the time being. The goblins and wolves would learn what it was like to fight in different environments, since not all parts of the forest were the same. It would be a good experience, and perhaps they may even learn to use that terrain to their advantage once they have adapted. There were a few more words exchanged on potential deals, but other than that, things seemed pretty much settled for the time being. I'd leave the adjustments to Rigard. He'd managed to iron out things pretty well with the ogre chief, and make their current trade somewhat equal. I'd leave it to him to do the same this time around. I think I'm gonna go on and make my way back to the ogre village now. I told Trainee once the two of us were outside the lizardmen cave. Can I trust you to share the details of the recent talks with Rigard, as well as ensuring that the rest of the talks go smoothly? I asked her as I jumped out of her arms, transforming into my human form and landing on the ground in front of her. Of course, Lord Rimuru, please leave it to me. I'll make sure everything goes as smoothly as possible, Trainee said with a reassuring smile. I wasn't really all that worried. Abaru seemed genuinely interested in making things work, and he was a very respectable leader in his own right. The fact that the goblins were my subordinates assured me that neither Abaru nor the other lizardmen would look down on them. As long as Abaru and Rigard were able to finalize the details on good terms, then everything should work out on its own. Having Trainee oversee the events was just an insurance, to make sure that the deal wasn't made unfair for one of the sides, despite how low the chances of such a thing happening were. Right, Then I'll leave it to you then, I said with an appreciative nod as draconic wings sprouted from my back. Trainee gave a nod of her own as she waved goodbye. With the flap of my wings I took off for the ogre village. Within the hour, I arrived at my destination. This time making sure I was emitting enough of my aura for them to identify me, whilst also taking care not to release too much so I didn't scare the surrounding wildlife. Using magic sense to search for specific signatures, it didn't take me long to find the people I was looking for, and fortunately enough they all happened to be together. So I flew over in that direction, waving at the ogres below me who'd either wave or bow their heads as I flew past them. I soon began my descent, touching down on the ground not too long after. Lord Rimuru. Before I could even turn in the direction I'd been called, I found my face being pulled into, and buried in, the large bosom that could only belong to the purple ogress. The scent and magic energy I sensed confirmed it was indeed her. I'm glad you made it back safely, sir, the purple ogress said happily as she tightened her embrace on me. It was nothing I couldn't handle, but I'm pretty sure she would have snapped the spinal cord of a normal human being with a hug this tight, either that or they would have suffocated being buried between these huge melons. You can stop hogging Lord Rimuru to yourself now. As usual, it was the princess who came to my rescue whenever I was in the clutches of the purple ogress. And as usual it worked, the purple ogress released her grip on me, allowing me to step back and take in some much-needed air. I turned to my left to see the princess approaching with the young master next to her. The blue-haired ogre was a few steps behind them. Welcome back, Lord Rimuru. I'm glad to see you return to us unharmed. The princess greeted with a bright smile. Indeed, when my sister returned to the village with Raya and told us of the situation we were slightly concerned. The young master added before his eyes widened in alarm, as if realizing he had made a mistake. And not that we doubted your strength or anything, Lord Rimuru, he added frantically in alarm. Relax, I get it. And your concern means a lot. To be honest, it was almost hard to believe this was the same redhead that drew his blade on me a few weeks ago. Still, it did mean a lot to know that they were concerned about my well-being, despite knowing I was strong enough to handle most threats within the forest. It showed they genuinely cared, that they didn't just see me as their lord or something along those lines, but they also saw me as a companion. The Dryads informed us of your victory against the fire spirit and that you were attending to other matters, but they didn't go into specifics. The young master explained. I remembered asking Doris to explain the situation to the ogres, but I had asked her to leave out details beyond my victory. I wasn't sure how the ogres would take the fact that I'd helped humans. If anything, I felt that was something they should hear from me directly rather than through messengers. Yeah, a lot of stuff happened afterwards, but I hope you don't mind if I speak with the chief about this first, I said with a slightly apologetic smile. It's not that I didn't want to tell them, but this kind of thing was best discussed with the chief first before making it public knowledge. Of course, that's perfectly reasonable. I'm sure my father has been expecting you as well, the redhead responded. I'm sure he already felt my aura, but I wanted to see you guys first before I went and started talking business with him. Nothing I have to say is that urgent, I said with a smile. To be honest, I hadn't realized how much I needed this. Casual conversation with friends. The goblins were all good folk, don't get me wrong, but as much as I had bonded with them, all of my stronger connections were here in the ogre village. After the passing of Masayuki and Shizu, I hadn't really had the chance to just talk to someone about all that, and honestly I didn't feel close enough to the goblins to do so. Perhaps there was a bit of favoritism there, but it was the truth. I could have turned to Trainee or one of her sisters, but they had their hands full with their responsibilities along with the tasks I had assigned them. I wasn't looking for pity or anything. I just wanted to talk to someone about everything that had happened. I need to get stronger than ever before. Even with the skills I gained from Shizu and Masayuki, along with the training I have undergone under the Ogre Elder, it still isn't enough. I need to properly master the skills I have. With things escalating due to that damn Gelmud and whatever demon lord he serves, I need to be ready. I thought as I looked towards the Ogre Princess and the Purple Ogress, who were also two of my fated ones. I won't let them, or anyone else I care about, suffer the same fate as Shizu. I will grow strong enough to protect them. I silently swore to myself. Still, there was the problem that exploring the full extent of my skills wasn't something I could do in the forest. Lord Rimuru, allow me to take you to my father so you may speak with him, the Ogre Princess said, drawing me away from my thoughts, to which I nod in agreement. As we walked towards the chief's meeting room, I took time to explain everything that had happened while I was gone, though I made sure to keep the mention of Shizu and Masayuki quiet for the time being. The princess was shocked that a servant of a demon lord was causing trouble in the great forest of Jura and had even unleashed a corrupted fire spirit upon it, and was greatly surprised when she learned about Abaru. I couldn't blame her, seeing as elemental spirits outside of the Dryads and Trents were rare in the forest, and the Lizardmen chief becoming my subordinate and a powerful A-ranked monster is no small matter. We soon arrived at our destination, the princess bowing her head as she gestured for me to enter. It seemed as though she wouldn't be following, which was fine by me since I wanted to talk to the chief alone anyway. I nodded my head in thanks, before sliding the door open and walking in. As expected, the chief had been patiently waiting for me, seated as he drank a cup of tea. Sliding the door closed behind me, I walked towards him until I was seated on the opposite side of him. "Welcome back, Lord Rimuru. Please allow me to congratulate you on your victory," the chief said with a soft smile as he poured me a cup of tea. "Thank you," I said as I took the cup he poured for me. As for the flame spirit, it wasn't as much of a challenge as I thought it would be. But the damage it caused to the forest, along with the 3 salamanders it summoned, was surprisingly large. I said as I drank a sip of the tea. As usual, it was good. It had a calming and clarifying effect on my mind, and put me at ease. Maybe so, but at the very least no major settlements were damaged by the attack, the chief said, which was true. Aside from some wildlife and nature, no sentient creatures had been damaged by the forest fire. The closest settlement to the scene had been the Goblin village, which had been evacuated as soon as the incident started. Yes, the Dryads were able to contain the flames, though they enlisted the aid of merfolk to do so, seeing as they don't do well with fire. I'm ashamed to admit I never actually thanked the merfolk for their aid. It's just that a lot happened after I stopped the spirit, I explained, leaving out the part where I had unintentionally helped out by literally sucking in some of the flames with my large hurricane. "I see," the chief muttered as he rubbed his chin in thought. The talks between us went on for a while longer. I told him everything that transpired afterwards, from Shizu being the host of Ifrit, trying and failing to save her and Masayuki, though I left out their last requests and how their bodies were taken care of. I felt that was a bit too private and personal. After that, I told him about the trip to the Lizardmen's domain and everything that happened there, making sure to notify him that the Lizardmen were also interested in doing trade with the ogres if possible. He had been surprised to hear that I named the Lizardmen chief, Abaru. "It seems your influence continues to grow. Though given your strength and lineage, that shouldn't surprise me. The fact that the Dryads have sworn loyalty to you gives you a lot more credibility as well, making things smoother," the chief said. He didn't seem too happy about that, nor did he seem upset, mind you. He just seemed to be in thought as he spoke, almost as if he was coming to a decision or something. "Yeah, from what Trainee told me, she and her sisters have been working on spreading word on my existence. They believe all the monsters of Jura should know the forest is not without a guardian, that my mother sired an heir," I explained with a sigh. I wasn't against it, but the whole thing just seemed to be moving too quickly for my liking. I did plan to eventually unite the tribes of Jura to form a nation, but I would rather it be gradual rather than rushing it. It may be for the best. Ever since Lady Veredia's presence vanished from the forest, a major shift has occurred, the chief said. You already witnessed the small power struggles that started within weeks of her disappearance. He was referring to the direwolf raid on the goblins. Yeah, I remember. The carnage I'd seen at the destroyed villages hadn't been pretty. Then imagine such power struggles happening with stronger species, such as us the ogres and perhaps the merfolk. The chief tried to give an example, but even then, our power can't compare to the monsters that live on the other side of the Almd River. I'm sure those are the monsters that truly worry the Dryads. Admittedly, I'd never flown beyond the river myself, which is kind of stupid, but from what I remember, Trainee told me that she and her sisters didn't have any jurisdiction there, and thus didn't manage that side of the forest. The monsters there were apparently strong too, some species even reaching rank A, but according to Trainee, they were an unruly bunch, and refused the protection of the Dryads. Even though my mother had appointed the Dryads managers of the whole forest. Unfortunately, my mother had been too carefree to involve herself in the matters of the monsters in Jura, and thus the Dryads were left with no choice but to leave the monsters of the other side as they were. Yes, Trainee told me about that some time ago. I could see why the Dryads would be concerned, given how unruly but powerful these monsters from the other side of the river were. There was a real chance they could cause a lot of damage if they were to start causing trouble. I suppose them being aware of my existence would help to keep them in check, though maybe going to the other side of the river would be more effective. Perhaps, but you must take caution. The dryads carry no weight to the monsters there. Should they not believe you, they may become hostile. The chief warned. If they do, then I'll simply have to put them in their place. I said with a confident grin. A-rank monsters may be stronger than average, but I could handle many of them no problem. That being said, the chief did have a point. I wouldn't be able to rely on Trainee and the others if I wanted to get the monsters from the other side to acknowledge or perhaps even follow me. I'd have to rely on my own strength and ability to negotiate. Perhaps a bit of humbling would help, the chief said with an amused smirk of his own. Looking down at his cup of tea, I saw him contemplating something for a few seconds, before he turned to face me once more. Lord Rimuru, may I ask you something? It's a bit personal? The chief asked cautiously. I found myself curious as to what he could want to ask me all of a sudden. I'm pretty sure that the chief knew all there was to know about me by now, at least what I wanted them to know. But if even he was hesitant to ask, then it had to be something that would either offend me or something that I'd keep close to my chest. Sure, go ahead, I replied after a moment of thought. Whether I'd answer or not depended on what the question was. Then again, silence in itself was an answer. Right, please forgive me for assuming, but are you an otherworlder? The chief asked, his eyes solely focused on my own. It took every ounce of my previous life's training not to give away my shock and nervousness at the completely random and unexpected question. You're right, that is rather presumptuous of you, I said calmly as I took a sip from my cup of tea. Though on the inside, I was nervous as hell. What brought this on? Did I somehow give myself away? I tried to think of anything I may have said or done that may have resulted in the ogre chief discovering that I was a reincarnated individual. There's no point in trying to deny it. While I'm sure the chief wouldn't press the matter, the fact that he knows is already a cause for concern. Do you mind if I ask what brought such a question to the table? I asked in return. I hadn't answered his question directly, but the chief was smart enough to read between the lines. It was just numerous small observations. Like when you initially came to our village, you claimed to have been born a month earlier and yet you showed such high levels of both intelligence and maturity. Then there was the way you offered to teach the purple ogress how to cook. Now I may not be the smartest individual, but even I saw some signs there. The chief said with an amused stare. Admittedly, I hadn't thought about that when I offered the purple ogress cooking lessons. I just wanted to be spared from the monstrosity that she called cooking back then. I mean, it bypassed my pain nullification skill, that literally meant her cooking had been strong enough to bend the rules. But looking back on it now, an infant monster having culinary skills was a bit strange, but to be honest, I didn't regret trying to help the purple ogress. She was doing a lot better now, her food being edible at the very least. It was only a matter of time before she finally got the hang of it. There were other small things that clued me in, but they all led me to the conclusion that you were a reincarnated soul, perhaps Lady Viridia reincarnated. But it wasn't until our most recent conversation that I realized you were an otherworlder. The chief said before taking a drink from his own cup. Earlier, when you spoke of the otherworlders you encountered, you seemed more upset and grieved than usual. And so I concluded that maybe you weren't just a reincarnated individual, but an otherworlder. I had already pegged you as wise and perceptive from when we first met, Chief, but it appears even I underestimated just how intelligent you were, I said with an amused sigh. His deductive capabilities were greater than I thought, being able to piece all of that together. The ogres of this village really were something else. But yes, you are correct, I am a reincarnated otherworlder. I didn't say anything since I wasn't sure how most monsters would react if they learned I was a former human, even if I was now the son and heir of the storm dragon. According to what my mother told me in the brief time we spoke, she had laid an egg without a soul. As a result, even though the body had fully developed, the egg would not hatch as the child within had no consciousness. Regardless, my mother kept and nurtured the egg. The dryads are the only ones that ever knew of the egg's existence. That, I can't possibly imagine, the chief said, probably feeling some sympathy for everything that my mother had gone through. It was probably hard for her, I said as I nodded my head. As aloof as she seemed when we first met, I can't imagine how she felt when she first found out her child had no soul or consciousness of his own. But she kept the egg, hoping for a miracle, Or perhaps she was counting on a soul reincarnating into this body. All I know for sure is that when I met her, she already knew I was an otherworlder. But she still welcomed me as her son, and with me having accepted this new life, I accepted her as my mother, and then she granted me the name, Rimuru, whilst I granted us the last name of Tempest. An equal naming process. She truly did accept you as her heir. I suppose there's nothing more to be said on the matter. At the end of the day, you're still Lady Veredia's flesh and blood. The chief said with a small smirk. I felt myself relax slightly. I was glad that he had taken the news so well. I was honestly concerned for a whole minute there. But while we were on the topic, actually, there's a question of my own I've been meaning to ask. But couldn't without revealing I was an otherworlder. I spoke up. Oh, please ask away. I'll gladly answer if it's something that I can. This village was influenced by an otherworlder at some point, right? More specifically, Japanese folk. I said as I looked right in the chief's eye. I noticed it from the moment I first encountered the ogres. Your clothing, armor, weapons, mannerisms, your homes, traditions, and even some of the food you cook. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, but that's too many coincidences for me to ignore. I explained, watching the chief's reaction as I spoke. Yes, our village traditions and our current way of life were indeed taught to us by humans. The chief said, closing his eyes in thought. It was approximately 400 years ago that a group of injured humans wandered into our village. We took them in and treated them. It was the first time we welcomed outsiders into our home. The chief explained before taking another sip of tea. I wasn't that surprised that the ogres didn't welcome many people into their home. They'd already proven to be somewhat of a prideful bunch. Guess the only reason they'd let me in was because they had been able to tell how strong I was. As thanks for treating them, they taught us their techniques as well as various other things that we have put into practice in our village. The Haze-style sword style is actually one of the techniques that was taught to us. The chief explained. They showed us many of the things you claim to have noticed. Others we developed on our own as we adapted to this new way of living. It made us stronger and smarter as a people. It certainly did explain why the ogres of this village seemed to be of a higher mentality than any other monster I'd encountered in the forest. Save for the dryads maybe. Still, to think that a group of humans would have such a profound impact on a village of monsters. It was nothing short of incredible. The leader of this group was a man who went by the name Byakuya Araki, and is actually the grandfather of the elder. The chief revealed. Wait, what? That revelation made me completely lose my composure. The elder's grandfather was a human? I was actually trying to wrap my head around the fact that these humans had stuck around long enough to procreate, and the fact that the ogres had actually done it with a weaker species like humans. These otherworlders must have been strong and respectable, there's just no other explanation. Now the elder, his grandfather being one of the humans that introduced the Haze style to the ogres, may explain why he was so talented with the blade, along with his age and experience. He'd probably been taught by Byakuya himself. Still, it was pretty shocking to find out that the elder had human blood flowing through his veins. And yet, somehow the old man had managed to live for 300 years. Yeah, that was definitely not his human blood at play. Indeed, most wouldn't think that looking at him, but it's the truth. The elder learned all that he could from Byakuya, becoming the most skilled warrior in our village, but still his technique paled in comparison to that of Byakuya himself. The chief said with closed eyes, more than likely remembering the past. Sounds like a truly skilled warrior. I would have loved the chance to meet him myself. I responded. Byakuya really sounded like an amazing dude. If his swordsmanship really outclassed even that of the elders, then that meant he was beyond a master swordsman. He probably had other arts and techniques he hadn't been able to teach the elder as well. Yes, he was, and so were his comrades. The things they taught us enriched our lives and made us stronger, and for that our people will always be grateful to them. The chief said with a grateful nod. Chief, about me being a reincarnate, is there anyone else who knows besides you? I asked the chief seriously as my eyes met his own. I wasn't ready for people to know the truth about my origins just yet, even if the ogres accepted me regardless. The more of them that knew, the higher the risk of word getting out eventually. Aside from myself, only the elder suspects. To be honest, it was him who picked up most of the out-of-place things about you. The chief responded with an amused smile. That's to be expected, he has a keen eye, and I've been spending a lot of time around him learning the way of the sword. I said with a sigh, not really surprised that the elder had been catching on. But it's manageable. Feel free to tell the elder, but I'd like to keep this quiet for the time being, at least until I choose to reveal that part of myself. Of course, we had no intention of telling anyone else. I merely wanted to sat my curiosity. The chief said with a chuckle. I couldn't help but let out a scoff of my own. That being said, hearing your answer did put things into perspective for me, and has helped affirm a decision that me and my people came to some time ago. Decision? I take it has something to do with me? I saw no other reason why he would bring it up now if it was something that just involved the ogres. Indeed, my lord, would you join me outside for a moment? The chief asked as he stood up, gesturing towards the door in invitation. I was confused as to what was going on at the moment. Regardless, I nodded my head in agreement and also stood up. The chief then walked around the table and towards the entrance without another word. I quietly followed, wondering what it was he was going to show me. The chief slid the door open and gestured for me to walk out first. Okay, a little strange, but regardless I stepped out first without questioning it too much. What I saw upon exiting had greatly surprised me. Standing before me were hundreds of ogres, likely the whole village if I had to guess, children and all. The chief's family was at the front of the rest, with the ogre elder also being nearby. They all seemed to be wearing rather serious expressions on their faces. The chief stepped out of the meeting room, moving past me, and standing in front of his family, before turning back to face me. To my surprise, he dropped down on one knee. Adding to that surprise was that the rest of the ogres followed suit, all going down on one knee before me. Lord Rimuru, we ogres are a warring clan. We take pride in our strength and skills that we spend our entire lives honing. But even we are not above serving others. If our master is strong and worthy of our respect, we would gladly serve them. The chief said, voice loud and firm. I could literally tell he was speaking as the chief, the leader of his people. After discussing it with my council and family, along with the others in our village, we have decided to swear our allegiance and loyalty to you. Please accept us as your loyal subordinates. Our blades will serve as an extension of your will. The chief requested, adding even further to my shock. When I came back to the ogre village, this was the last thing that I had expected to happen. If anything, I never expected this to happen ever. I always assumed the ogres were too proud of a clan to submit to me on their own, unlike the goblins who literally threw themselves at my feet. Then again, comparing the two wasn't really fair, all things considered. Still, for them to be the ones to pledge themselves to me like this, it couldn't have been easy. Perhaps the fault lay with me for taking too long to bring the subject up. I'd grown comfortable with the way things were that I didn't want the ogres to change and start revering me the same way the goblins did. Though thinking about it now, I was probably overthinking it. Aside from some additional respect, I didn't think things would change that much. Or at least I hoped not. Are you sure this is what you want? I asked, using desire to try and get a read on how everyone was feeling about this. It was a major decision, one that would impact the rest of their lives and the future of their people. Yes, my lord, as I said, it has been thoroughly discussed. Changes have already begun to occur within the forest, with you at the head of it all. We simply wish to walk along the path you will pave for us. The chief explained. I reached out my empathy skill, getting a read on how everyone else felt about this. As expected, a few were cautious, some anxious, and some seemed against it. But overall, I'd say about 3/4 of the village fully supported the idea of becoming my subordinates. The chiefess, princess, and young master seemed satisfied and happy, and the elder seemed equally satisfied. The purple ogress was radiating such levels of joy that I was surprised she was still kneeling down all prim and proper. The blue-haired ogre seemed somewhat neutral but satisfied, if that made any sense. It was hard to read people like him, but guess that was something I was going to have to work on. Very well then. I, Rimuru Tempest, guardian of the great forest of Jura, accept your allegiance. From this day onward, this village is under my protection, and as long as I'm here, no threat shall step foot in this village. I declared, much to the shock and joy of the ogres. To be honest, this village was already under my protection the moment I started living here. Those closest to me more than likely already knew that. This declaration was just a means to help me earn the trust of those who still had reservation about me becoming their lord and master. All hail Lord Rimuru, the rightful lord and guardian of the great forest of Jura. The chief shouted as he rose from his kneeling position, throwing a fist into the air. All hail Lord Rimuru. The ogre village responded in kind as they all stood and cheered. The phrase was chanted a few times, and I took a moment to just take in the sight of the merry mood that had suddenly filled the air. I had a feeling that the ogres were going to throw a huge feast tonight. Not that my stomach was complaining. I could do with some delicious food right about now. That being said, there was something else on my mind. Great Sage, how many ogres could I safely name in one go? Preferably to a rank. The last part was said as a precaution since pretty much all the monsters I'd named had skipped at least one rank. If the same happened here, then the ogres would jump to Special A rank, which would put them above the Dryads, save Trainee, who I'm pretty sure is on the lower spectrum of Special A rank. Even evolving them to a rank was bound to drain my Magicules. Naming Abaru had taken about 12% of my Magicules, but given that he jumped 2 ranks, I couldn't accurately measure. Open double angle bracket answer. Evolution from B rank to A rank consumes 9% of total Magicules. Total number of ogres that can be named whilst ensuring the user has enough Magicules to be operational is 7. However, due to naming the individual Abaru, users' Magicules have yet to fully recover, reducing number of ogres that can be named to 6, close double angle bracket. And how long would it take to recover my Magicules after naming 7 ogres? I asked. Open double angle bracket answer. Estimated recovery time, 16 hours, close double angle bracket. That was more than I thought, but it wasn't really something I could complain about. It made sense that I could only name a limited number of ogres at a time. I'd be more shocked by how op I was if I could name many of them like I had done with the goblins and wolves. Looking on as the ogres continued chanting, I raised my hand to catch their attention. It seemed to do the trick as they immediately began to quiet down, their attention on me once more. My eyes moved over the chief and his family, the elder, the purple ogress, and the blue-haired ogre. These 7 were without a doubt the strongest connections I'd built since coming to this. It only made sense that I'd name them first. Unfortunately though, I could only name 6 ogres today, due to having already named Abaru earlier. Otherwise I would have done all of them in one go. I guess I'd have to compromise. Chief, could you, your family, and the village elder step forward please? I requested. The chief's eyes seemed to widen momentarily, more than likely having realized what I was about to do, though given what I'd done with the goblins, wolves, and now Abaru, it wasn't that hard to reach the conclusion. The chief ushered his family forward, the elder stepped up as well. Within a few seconds they all stood side by side right in front of me. The chief, the chiefess, the young master, the princess, and lastly the elder. That was the order in which they stood from left to right, meaning I'd probably start with the chief. The 5 of them dropped down on one knee, ready for whatever order I had to give them. To officially mark this village as under me, and you as my subordinates, I will give you names. I said, much to the shock of all the ogres, the head family included, with the exception of the chief who merely smiled as he bowed his head. Many whispers and talks began to go through the large crowd of ogres. I guess they were surprised and somewhat concerned that I was naming them. It was the same reaction with the goblins, wolves, and lizardmen. But the ogres are much stronger than all of them had initially been prior to me naming them, so their concern was somewhat valid. There's no need to be concerned. I've already run the necessary calculations, and know the Magicule cost of naming you ogres. I said loudly, once more silencing the ogres and catching their attention. Ogres are already a powerful species by default, and those of this village are even more so, hence I can't name too many of you. At least not in one sitting, but my goal is to eventually name all the ogres of this village with time. I explained. The effect was instant as the ogres not only calmed down, but began to cheer at the prospect of being named. Given the number of ogres in this village, it would likely take dozens of days if I followed the safety protocol Great Sage had mentioned earlier. The alternative was that I get stronger and increase the max number of ogres I could name in a single sitting. I'd figure it out as I went along. I then turned towards the chief, his family, and the elder who were still kneeled in front of me. As I moved towards the chief, the rest of the ogre village quieted down. More than likely not wanting to interrupt or miss this moment. To the ogre chief, leader of this warrior village, I grant the name, Akatsuki. I said. The effect was immediate as a large amount of Magicules left my body and entered the now-named chief. Use the power I've granted you to not only serve me well, but to lead your people towards a brighter future. Thank you, my lord. I will strive to meet and exceed all your expectations. The chief said with his head bowed, his body glowing as the evolutionary process began. As much as I wanted to watch, I knew we'd be here all day if I worked like that. And so I moved on to the chiefess. To the chiefess, who always carries herself with grace and elegance, and yet behind that is just as shrewd and cunning, I'll grant you the name, Sakura. I said with a grin, my words earning a giggle from the chiefess herself as my power entered her. You once told me you were quite the warrior, and were especially talented in magic. I look forward to seeing you in action one day. Yes, my lord, thank you for granting me this grand opportunity. The chiefess, now named Sakura, said happily. The amount of magicules that left me this time were slightly higher than with her husband Akatsuki, but considering I was helping her replenish the power she lost through conception then evolving her further, I guess it made sense. I moved on to the young master. To the young master, you still have much to learn in the ways of leadership and making decisions with a cool head. That said, your potential may be the greatest within this village. I'll grant you the name, Benimaru. I said to the redhead. I didn't hold anything against him anymore, but I felt a good reminder before naming him would do some good. Grow fast, Benimaru. I'll be needing more than just raw strength from you in the near future. Yes, Lord Rimuru, I shall strive to improve myself not only as a warrior, but as an individual too. This I swear, the young master, now Benimaru, said with conviction as my power entered him as well. I had high hopes for him. If all went well, he would be one of my closest subordinates. With a nod, I moved on to the next ogre, the princess. To be honest, ever since that time at the elf bar, I hadn't been able to stop thinking about how the princess looked different then, both her and the purple ogress. I wonder if her evolution would have something to do with it. It most likely would. If so, then this was literally a prophecy coming true or whatever. To the ogre princess, your perception and ability to analyze has been something that caught my eye, something that stood out amongst the other ogres. I'll grant you the name, Shuna. I said, magicules leaving my body once more, the power entering her body. I hope those talents of yours can be developed further, alongside your talent for magic. Thank you, Lord Rimuru, I promise I'll do my very best. The princess said as the magicules entered her as well. I took a step back as I watched the leading family of the ogre village glow as their names became engraved in their very souls, and their magicules began to rise. But I felt there was one last thing I needed to do, to make it so they stood out from the rest of the crowd, though I wasn't sure if what I had in mind would consume even more magicules. It certainly hadn't when I'd done it with my mother in the sealed cave, so it shouldn't now. As the leading family of this village, and to further distinguish you from your fellow ogres, I have also decided to bestow upon the four of you a family name, Hattori. From this day forward, you are Akatsuki Hattori, Sakura Hattori, Benimaru Hattori, and Shuna Hattori. I declared to everyone's surprise and wonder. No magicules seemed to leave my body, but I did feel a shift in the connection that had been initiated when I named them, the family name, Hattori, also becoming engraved within them. I'd chosen the last name, Hattori, as it came from a legendary Japanese warrior by the name of Hattori Hanzo, A.N., or Hanzo Hattori, in Western connotation, FYI. A renowned samurai and ninja who was deemed the best of his time and reputed to have supernatural abilities, he led various battles and played a pivotal role in the unification of Japan, and even after his death, he became an inspiration for future generations. I figured it was a good name to give to the leading family of a warrior village who would undoubtedly help a lot in uniting the various monster races of the great forest of Jura and forming a monster nation. I moved on to the village elder. And lastly, the village elder, your skill with the blade is second to none, and you have centuries worth of experience to back it up too. I'll grant you the name, Hakuro. I said as magicules left me once more, before a thought suddenly came to mind. And in honor of your otherworlder grandfather, the great Byakuya Araki, I have also decided you will inherit his family name, Araki. From this day forward, you are now Hakuro Araki. I declared. I figured it was only right. The ogre village wouldn't even have the haze style that they specialized in if it wasn't for Byakuya and the other humans. It was the least I could do to at least honor them in some way. Lord Rimuru, you honor this old man with your kindness, the elder said with gratitude as he bowed his head. I'm sure he had already pieced together how I knew about his grandfather, but I'd still need to talk to him later on. The evolutionary glow engulfed the 5 named ogres. It took a minute or so before the light finally died down to reveal their newly evolved forms. Open double angle bracket notice. Evolution to Kijin for the individuals Akatsuki, Sakura, Benimaru, Shuna, and Hakuro was successful. Close double angle bracket. So that was the A-rank evolution of an ogre, a Kijin. Looking at them now, I could tell that they had lost a lot of the muscle mass they had as ogres. Their figures had also become smaller, almost human-like. Akatsuki looked like a man in his mid-40s, with light red hair and amber-orange eyes. Though the two white horns coming out his forehead were a clear reminder that he wasn't human. They seemed to have gotten slightly longer and weren't as thick too. They were definitely sharper though. Sakura had changed into a woman who seemed to be in her early 40s, but had aged wonderfully, making her younger than she actually was. Her hair, mostly white with a tinge of pink, seemed to have smoothed out, making her look more elegant and refined. Benimaru's appearance seemed to be that of a man in his early 20s, which made sense. His blazing red hair and fiery eyes seemed to stand out even more now than before. The markings that had been around his eyes seemed to have also narrowed and become smaller. Shuna's appearance seemed to be exactly how I had seen it in the crystal ball from the elf bar in Dwargon. Surprisingly, by becoming more human-like, she seemed slightly older, putting her at 19 or even 20 years old, with a petite figure, adorable pink eyes, and a disarming smile. Hakuro, who'd been 300 years old as an ogre, so it wasn't surprising to see him appear old even as a Kijin. Though he did seem to have regained some of his youth, seeing as he looked like he was in his early 50s when as an ogre he looked like he was in his late 60s. He also seemed a tad bit taller, and was standing straighter too. All in all, they seemed to have become smaller in stature, becoming human-like and more refined compared to the wild and slightly intimidating appearance they had as ogres. Aside from that, their magicules and aura also seemed to have exploded to that of monsters befitting their new rank, placing all of them firmly at mid-A rank. Though there were obviously slight differences in the strengths they had acquired from their evolution, such as how Benimaru seemed to have the most magicules and Hakuro regaining his youth, each of them had become more powerful in their own right. Only time would tell just how far they had come and the skills that they had unlocked as a result. I was kind of looking forward to it. I watched as the rest of the ogre village cheered and began to surround the 5 Kijin, congratulating them on their names, family names, and successful evolution. The atmosphere was definitely jovial and everyone seemed to be looking towards the future with hopeful eyes, a future that I was meant to lead them to. The ogres, and Kijin too now, weren't just allies to me now. They were my subordinates, powerful ones at that. Should I name more of them? It was a sign that my influence and power within this forest was growing, and with it more would be expected of me. The dryads were already spreading word of my existence, it was only a matter of time. It seemed Benimaru wasn't the only one that needed to improve himself. I needed to become better, both as a leader and as a warrior.